and welcome to this program, which is the top in terms of conversation in Nigeria and global politics. And it's at the intersection of domestic issues and foreign policy. President Trump of the US triggered this conversation in ways in which members of the panel will discuss. But before he triggered it, it's been the #1 topic in terms of contemporary Nigeria and its future. Areas around the challenges to insecurity, grounded in the long history of the creation of the country itself, resource conflicts grazing routes, minerals, water, land, and oil, and around issues of governance, the legacy of military rule, contested federalism, uneven development, the call for a new constitution, and more. The insecurity covers all regions of the country: the Northeast Boko Haram, ISWAP, rural violence, as in the case of Northwest and North Central, cattle rustling, kidnapping, and it covers farmer-herder confrontations. Some have argued that they are concentrated in North Central, Middle Belt, and South. Some have argued that some are due to the impact of desertification, the scarcity of land, population growth, and migration. And there are separatist agitations and insurgencies, Southeast and South-South, IPOB, South-South, Niger Delta militancy, and all over the country, urban crime and kidnapping for ransom. And today we have to add Yahoo, cyber crime, very sophisticated in terms of its network. We are going to discuss, as this conversation proceeds, the drivers of insecurity, its characterization, the impact, the limitations of government initiatives, the threat by Trump, and how we can build enduring sustainability in terms of how we would deal with this issue. Greater than me, more influential and far more astute are members of our panelists. And I will introduce them not in order of their importance, but in order of convenience. Mr. Azu Ishiekwene, if I mispronounce your name, forgive me, is the one who put this panel together. And I'm really, really very grateful to him. He's the Senior Vice Chairman, Editor-in-Chief of Leadership Newspaper Group, a prominent journalist, over 35 years experience, holding position as editor, executive director in Punch, and group managing director, leadership. He's a fellow of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, editorial board member of the World Policy Journal, founding board of the Global Editors Network. He studied mass communication from the University of Lagos and also with degrees in public administration and international affairs. He's lectured at the Department of Mass Communication, University of Lagos, and at the Nigerian Institute of Journalism. He sees himself as a man of faith. He's a member of an NGO that sponsors poor people to school, and he has also won many awards, including the DME Informed Commentary of the Year Award. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Dr. Simbo Olorunfemi is a columnist, a writer, policy analyst, specializing in Nigeria's foreign policy, and is currently doing his PhD at the University of Lagos, where he already had obtained master's degree. He's very well published, close to a dozen books, and he was a runner-up for the TV Producer of the Year and has won the Nigerian Media Merit Awards in 1991 and the ENA Prize for his first book, The Many Faces of Lagos. It also won the Cadbury Prize. He's a member of the Advertising Registration Council of Nigeria. He's a team leader and a very prominent leader. Ms. Olorunfemi Baruwa is an international development specialist with over 20 years of experience across government, philanthropy, and civil society. And he works at the intersection of gender, social inclusion, social justice, and public policy. She has led several social policies and reforms in Nigeria, served at various times as program officer, Special Trust Fund, and National Poverty Eradication Program. She was the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Women's Trust Fund. She was the Gender Advisor at the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, Technical Research, Assistant Research, Policy and Planning in the Ministry of Communication Technology, and Deputy Director, Federal Ministry of Education. Until recently, she was the Regional Program Officer for Gender, Racial, and Ethnic Justice at the Ford Foundation Office, West Africa, covering Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal. Dr. Majid Dahiru is a very well-known figure, writer, appears on TV so many times, an influential public affairs analyst. He lives in Abuja, and he writes for Premium Times, where he's known for his incisive commentaries, focusing on governance, social justice, and historical memory. Born in Kogi State, he draws from a deep cultural and religious heritage, weaving personal narrative with sharp analysis in a style that many people can connect with. My Little Amajiri Story and The Future of History in Nigeria are two of his best read pieces that speak to the idea of the nation. And from his writing, public engagement, Dr. Dahiru has distinguished himself as a courageous voice for unity and truth. Dr. Bulama Bukarti is a lawyer and human rights advocate by training. Dr. Bukarti has served as an analyst, senior fellow at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change in London. And there he focuses on extremist movements in Africa. He is regarded as one of the most insightful analysts on extremism, governance, and social change. Thanks to his work, his media commentary is now rated as a leading voice on issues around security, ideology, development, covering a large swath of space in the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, and beyond. He has been able to provide analysis to policymakers, governments, international organizations, papers that possess scholarly rigor with a profound understanding of culture. He was the vice president for DDR and de-radicalization of the Bridgeway Foundation. He has overseen the rehabilitation and integration of more than 300 former members of the Islamic State Central African Province. His commentaries have been carried by the BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, and other outlets. And he has published in Washington Post, Foreign Policy, The Independent, The Telegraph, and African Governments, among others. You can see the caliber, the enormous caliber of members of our panel. Last Saturday, 18 countries joined, and today I'm able to report that people have joined from 32 countries. That is a very high number. We have media journalists who will be reporting this conversation from Vanguard, from Punch, from Tribune, The Elephant in Kenya, The Sun in South Africa. And we have a different line for officials who have joined us, public officers who do not want to appear on Facebook, YouTube, on Zoom. Members of the audience, the procedure is this. The members of the panel will spend 5 minutes or a little more on issues of interest to them. They will cross-examine one another if they disagree or agree, and they will reaffirm or distance themselves from positions they don't agree with. Thereafter, I will ask questions. And the last and the most important segment is intervention from members of the audience. There is no prior conversation about what all the panelists will say. There is no coordination. There is no propaganda. And there is no micromanaging. So that we cover a broad terrain of people. What they are going to say, I don't know. But I will invite them one at a time, starting with Dr. Dahiru Majid. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the privilege to be on this panel today. And without much ado, I would like to go straight into the issue. Nigeria for many years has suffered from a multidimensional and multifaceted challenge of insecurity that has pushed the Nigerian state to the brink of failure. So the recent intervention that came from the White House, arising from cries of Christian genocide in Nigeria and persecution of Christians, is simply a manifestation of what has been happening for many years in Nigeria. As a Nigerian and as a Muslim, I will be speaking from my own shared experiences, my lived through experiences, and the truth about the issues arising from violent extremism in Nigeria that are often not spoken about. Now, I have decided to disaggregate the concerns raised by the United States government when Nigeria was recently placed on the list of countries of particular concern. And in disaggregating these issues, they talked about persecution of Christians on one hand, and then Christian genocide on the other hand. Now, in Nigeria, a lot of conversations have been thrown up around these allegations or this charge by the United States government in a manner that is threatening to obscure or obfuscate the real issues, thereby preventing us from having clarity of issues in order to have clear-cut solutions to our existential problems as a state. So first, let me deal with the issue, the claim, the charge of Christian genocide in Nigeria. Before I come to the issue of persecution as much as I can. Now, whereas there are conflicting voices, there are opposing voices, if you like, about whether or not there's a Christian genocide in Nigeria. However, I do not think anybody can live in denial of the fact that there are targeted killings of Christians in Nigeria. And if the killings are allowed to go on continuously, it will get to a proportion of casualties that it will satisfy all opposing views and definitions of genocide. So what is important is that I affirm today that there are targeted killings of Christians. And the major culprit here appears to be the Islamic State of West Africa province and killer headsmen operating in central Nigeria, particularly in states like Plateau and Benue. Now, each is a jihadi terrorist group that has an ultimate goal of pulling down the secular, constitutional, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, democratic setup that is Nigeria today and erect in its place their own version of a Puritan Islamic state. And for this to happen, certain levels of cleansing must take place, particularly its non-Muslim population. And so it's not a surprise. Everybody knows, everybody's familiar that it is only natural that they would target specifically people of other faith, particularly the Christian brethren in Nigeria. And so that is something they've been doing without actually pretending about it. This was such a serious issue that even the federal government under the Bukarti administration reacted to the antics of Israel when they made public their execution of prominent Christian figures and their sacking of Christian villages and communities. The federal government, they're speaking to the Minister for Information, Lai Mohammed, actually acknowledged that they were targeted killings of Christians, but that it was aimed to destabilize the entire country and incite sectarian crisis. So I think that matter is a matter that should by now be arrested. Now, coming to the issue of killer headsmen. Now, one killer headsmen may not themselves be jihadi groups per se, but the fact that most of their casualties appear to be Christians, it could also be said of the group that the people that they target are Christians. So if you look at it, you cannot fault a Christian Nigerian who lives within the sphere of influence of these two groups that are carried out on the issue of genocide. You can't fault them. It is something to be looked into. And again, you cannot describe for people how to feel. I understand the argument that Boko Haram, and even the shop sometimes, has killed probably more Muslims than Christians. Now, this is where we are not getting certain things right for those who hold such positions. You see, the common denominator here is that the killing machine, is a Muslim group. I've always argued that Boko Haram or Iswap or any other jihadi group may not be Islamic, but they are Muslim, meaning they are Muslims, but their actions might not comply or conform with our own definition of Islam. But the reality of the matter is that they are Muslims and they seek to carry out what they believe is the practicalization of their religious duty of jihad. So this must be a fact that should be taken into cognizance. And in this instance, when you talk about genocide has to do with the identity of victims and the identity of perpetrators, creed, race, religion, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So I've always contended that when a Muslim group, a Muslim jihadi group, kills 1,000 Muslims, it will not raise concern of genocide as much as when one Christian or one non-Muslim is killed by the same group, because we're discussing identity-based crime. And so what is important here is that there's a common denominator, a group that is killing non-Nigerians across religious divides. But you cannot also fault the Christian victims or families of the Christian victims from saying, look, we think we are being targeted because of our religion. And that fear is valid because for everyone Muslim that is killed by these jihadi groups, it is because in the consideration of the jihadi group, these people are not Muslims. But when jihadi groups kill a single Christian or more, it is indeed because they are Christians. They are killed on the basis of their faith. So it is important to understand this and show some level of empathy to our Christian brethren in Nigeria because it is necessary for national healing and the coming together of all hands to be on the deck to defeat this common evil. Now, coming to the central part of Nigeria, Benue and Plateau has been a major problem, a major flashpoint of Fulani cattle breeders that are considered as settlers and the mostly predominantly Christian communities that are considered as host communities. Now, the Nigerian state has often described the killings or the conflicts, rather, in the Benue and the Plateau as communal. And I've always pointed out to the authorities that it is not communal in nature because those you accuse, for instance, of carnal attacks on, say, Fulani communities are usually not those upon which reprisal are carried out in some of these revenge attacks. For instance, sometime in 2018 or thereabout, there was a massacre of hundreds of people in Plateau State. And the Mieti Allah group then took responsibility when one of their leaders spoke to a correspondent of the Nation newspapers and said, look, criminal elements within this community rustled our cattle and were able to recover our cattle. So we had to go into the community to exact revenge. Now, and in the process, hundreds of Christians that are returning from a church service, a funeral service, Christian mothers, were mowed down and had to be saved by an imam who actually hit some over 200 people in his own mosque to prevent them from being killed. Now, the group that claimed responsibility is called Mieti Allah, and the victims are Christians. Again, there is no way you can fault anybody on this other side who believes indeed that you were targeted because of their faith, because the people that have been killed, we are not by nature of imagination the ones who rustle the cattle or kill the herdsmen. But the Nigerian state treats these issues as though it is communal crisis. Now, coming to Benue, it is also the same thing. Most of the victims are usually people that profess to be Christians, while the perpetrators are those who are Muslim, at least in outlook, maybe not in practice, but in outlook. So the conversation should be how do we put an end to the killing across the country that affects whether you're Christian or Muslim without denying the fact that Christians are targeted by groups that appear to be Muslim. Now, talking about persecution is real in Nigeria in terms of as it concerns the Christian community. In predominantly northern Muslim states, the very imposition of Sharia laws across 12 states, beginning from around 2000, that in itself is the foundation for the persecution of Christians in some parts of Nigeria. Because on the surface of it, and apart from blasphemy laws and the misapplication of blasphemy laws to non-Muslims, on the surface of it, Muslims will argue that Sharia laws is simply an advancement of our faith as Muslims, since we're enjoined to live with the injunctions as contained in the Holy Quran and the tradition of the Prophet, which basically sums up Sharia law. But beneath the surface is that Sharia law is not entirely a divine document, because of the four sources of Sharia, only the Quran is divine. The Hadiths, the opinion of scholars, and some other sources of the Hadiths of the Sharia cannot by any stretch of imagination be considered divine. So there are some provisions in the Sharia that now undermines the fundamental rights of non-Muslims within a Sharia-governed Islamic territory. So to put it simply, non-Muslims, Christians and all, do not enjoy the same or equal rights with Muslims in a Sharia-governed territory. And this has manifested its ways in so many ways in Nigeria as it concerns Christians. Apart from political exclusion, apart from repression, apart from systematic marginalization, denial of justice when it has to do with faith is also a matter to be highlighted here. For instance, in Kano, sometime in 2017, a certain Christian woman called Bridget Agbahime was killed by a mob simply because she refused a Muslim from performing ablution in front of her shop in one of the markets in Kano, for refusing him to perform ablution in front of her shop and ask him to move to the corner away from her shop, was considered blasphemy, and she was mobbed to death, and justice was not brought to bear in this matter. As we speak, not a single person has been brought to justice in this case. How about the notorious case of Deborah Samuels in Sokoto, for instance, who was also similarly mobbed to death in the most barbaric of manners? But the Sokoto state government, and even the federal government at the time, has not been able to bring anybody to justice for this. So we have such issues, which clearly amounts to persecution. I said this because as a Nigerian and as a Muslim, I'm committed to secularity of Nigeria because it protects all of us. The same way I feel diminished when they have some predominantly Christian, Southern Christian governors declaring their states unilaterally as Christian states and deploying state resources to build gigantic cathedrals without building mosques, for instance. If we are residents of this state or even indigenous of this state, I'll feel so diminished and feel unequal before the law, before the state, as not equally represented. So I feel that these are issues of concern, and the reaction of the Trump administration should be a shock therapy to reset the system within Nigeria, to prevent what has been going on for so long, secure this country for all, and return Nigeria to the status quo of a secular constitutional democracy where no religion dominates the other, and where all Nigerians, all citizens, have equal access under the state, equal protection, and without any form of persecution at all. I say this because I can find myself also as a minority in some parts of the country and I'll face them. So the golden rule should apply. So if, for instance, I desire for others what I desire for myself, I have a duty to speak out on some of these issues. So yes, are there targeted Christian killings in Nigeria? It is true there are targeted Christian killings. Now, has it gotten to genocidal proportion? Well, it depends on the semantics you try to apply, but one thing is certain. Genocide is reported in the past tense, and genocide starts with just one killing. So what is important here is this: if we agree that there are targeted killings of Christians in some instances, all hands must be on the deck to take out the killers of these Christians in a targeted manner, and those also kill Muslims generally. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that elaborate conversation. And I appreciate your take. Declaring yourself as a Muslim makes it more significant. I want to thank officers from the African Union who have joined this program, and representatives of ECOWAS who have also joined this program. Let me now turn to Dr. Bulama Bukarti for your opening statements. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Professor, and your team. I'm very happy to have joined this panel, and I am looking forward to an insightful conversation. Majid has done an elaborate introduction. Some of his arguments I found very difficult to follow, and some of them I disagree entirely. But I would focus mostly on what I thought I would present as my opening, and then we can discuss some of the issues he raises in the next section. Now, the first point I want to start by making is that Nigeria is facing serious security challenges. That's not in doubt. Communities, Muslim and Christians alike, have been attacked. Thousands have been killed every year. Homes have been destroyed, livelihoods have been destroyed, and millions are currently internally displaced in our country, especially in the northern part of Nigeria. This conversation shouldn't have been about which community suffered more or is suffering more, but should have been more about what are the root causes, what are the drivers, what are the symptoms and complications, and how do we tackle the crisis. Unfortunately, because of some of the recent comments from the United States of America, we cannot run away from discussing the numbers. We shouldn't be discussing numbers. An attack on one Nigerian should be an attack on all Nigerians. Killing one Nigerian should be a threat to all Nigerians, and all Nigerians should come together, unite, and fight whoever is killing any Nigerian, regardless of the faith of the Nigerian that has fallen victim. But because of the situation we have found ourselves, we have to discuss the numbers. And Professor, I agonize discussing the numbers because I have never seen Nigeria's security crisis from a religious length to discuss Christian and Muslims. We are all Nigerians. We are all human beings. We all have a right to live. We all have a right to dignity. We all have a right to enjoy Nigeria and to toil and moil together. Now, when I saw Trump's comments, it reminded me some of my work in my PhD when I was looking at my when I was doing my PhD research. Part of what I did in the PhD work was to track Boko Haram's attacks on civilians, because my PhD looks at Boko Haram's claims of fighting a religious war, and I was trying to see whether they attacked security forces more or they attacked civilians more. And in the process of that, I analyzed the major civilian locations attacked by Boko Haram between 2011 and 2020. And after intensive analysis of the Nigerian security tracker data, which is compiled by the Council on Foreign Relations, I found, for example, I tracked attacks on churches, I tracked attacks on mosques, on markets, on bus garages and others. I wouldn't go into each of them. But when it came to places of worship, between 2011 and 2020, Boko Haram attacked 83 churches. And in those 83 churches, it killed 1,521 people, according to the Nigerian security tracker data. They also, in this period, attacked 72 mosques. And in those 72 mosques, they killed 2,017 people. Now, this is within a period of 11 years, as I said, 9 years, 2011 to 2020. Now, the Nigerian security tracker data may not have captured all attacks by Boko Haram, but it is a very good data that is representative anywhere you may find it. And that was my argument in the PhD work. Now, but it is not just the Nigerian security tracker data, and it is not just my data. It is also analysis by Hilary Matfess and Jason Warner, which was published by the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point of the United States Military Academy. They were interns at the United States Military Academy at the Combating Terrorism Center, and they analyzed 283 attacks by Boko Haram, suicide attacks by Boko Haram, between 2014 and 2017. And they found that of the 283 and 38 suicide bombings by Boko Haram, 15.55% were on mosques. 15.55% were on mosques, or they call them Muslim religious targets, while 5.04% were on Christian religious targets. 15.55% on Muslim religious targets, while 5.04% were on Christian religious targets. And there are other researches by the French, for example. These are interns in the United States, but there was another research published by IFRA, which is based in the University of Ibadan, and they used the Nigerian Data Watch or Security Watch. I can find you the correct data. And all of these are online. They are publicly available online. 3 French authors, I can give you the names if you like, analyzed Boko Haram's attacks between 2009 and 2012. And they found that for every Christian killed by Boko Haram, at least 2 Muslims have been killed. Now, I hate reciting these figures in this way because I never looked at crisis in terms of people's faith. I look at it as all of us as humans, as Nigerians who have a right to live and with dignity and with freedom. Now, no one who is claiming Christian genocide, either by Boko Haram or by other groups, can point you to a credible data that is publicly available, that is verifiable, who can give you one data point that shows that Christians suffered more than Muslims in the Boko Haram crisis. Of course, we may have all reviewed the BBC data recently. They looked at the claims that were being made of the 100 Christians killed, I think, over the last 5 years, and 100,000 Christians and 60,000 Muslims. Even if you took that, you will say, okay, 60,000 and 100,000. But the BBC tracked it and they found that there was no credible source on which that estimate was based, the data by Inter-Society. But they went on to analyze ECLED data, which is another data I use in my PhD, and they found that over the past 5 years, because my PhD stopped 5 years ago, that is 2020, they found that over the past 5 years, around 21,000 Nigerians have been killed, and they found in the BBC report that 317 of them were Christians. I think there will be more than 317 that are Christians, but maybe they found that 317 of those whose religion have been identified in the reports. Now, what this data tells us, all of this data tells us that Christians are being killed and Muslims are being killed. And it is true that Boko Haram and other groups that we are talking about, some of them target Christians and they kill them because of their faith. But what Majid misunderstands is that Boko Haram doesn't see me or you as a Muslim. And many Muslims don't see Boko Haram as a Muslim group because they think Boko Haram misinterprets, misapplies, and mistranslate Islamic scriptures. And so when Boko Haram kill Muslims, they say we kill them because they are non-Muslims for practicing democracy, for voting in elections, for going to secular schools, for living in a country that has secular laws instead of their interpretation of Islamic law. And so framing it as a Muslim, intra-Muslim violence, when the group itself doesn't see the Muslims they kill as Muslims, I think is mistaken. And assuming they see them as Muslims, does the fact that this is a group claiming to be Muslim, killing Muslim, does that reduce the suffering from the Muslim community? I mean, I found it very hard to follow that argument. And to be honest, that's because of the 2 reasons I mentioned. Now, there is Christian persecution in some Muslim majority states. And that's a fact. That's a fact. Unfortunately, what Majid maybe doesn't know or didn't mention are Muslim marginalization and persecution in Muslim minority states. And I am mentioning this not because it is good, it is wrong for Christians to be marginalized in Muslim communities, and it is wrong for Muslims to be marginalized in Christian majority states. Maybe some of you from the South know better than I do the fate of the Igbo minority Muslims, the minority Igbo Muslims. How are they being treated in the Igbo communities? How are Muslims treated in Muslim minority states, even in northern Nigeria like Plateau and Benue states? And why are we looking at it from all the communities it is happening? Because unless and until we understand the disease, we diagnose the disease well, our prognosis and our prescription will be wrong. And if our prognosis and prescriptions are wrong, the medicine we will prescribe will only end up hurting the body, helping the disease rather than healing the sick. And so we are facing a very serious security challenge. Muslims are being killed. Christians are being killed. Christians are being targeted in some communities for being Christians. Muslims are being targeted for being Muslims, for their interpretation of their faith in the way they did. But then what are the root causes? Why have these groups proven to be resilient over the years? Why has the Nigerian government woefully failed to tackle these groups in the way they should be tackled? These are some of the questions I would love to go into. I can see that, Professor, you have unmuted. I think I'll stop here, just pointing that I would love to hear from Majid, for example, specific examples of where Christian citizens of the 12 states that have implemented the Sharia in northern Nigeria are treated less than the Christian citizens of those states. Because the Sharia laws of all the 12 states that you mentioned clearly say no Sharia court has jurisdiction over a Christian. And the argument Muslims make in northern Nigeria is that these are courts we want established to adjudicate our disputes. And all the Sharia courts of the state say if there is a dispute between a Muslim and a Christian, that should go to a conventional court, unless and until where the Christian himself or herself chooses to submit to the jurisdiction of the Sharia court. And I can tell you, go to Kano, you will see records of Igbo traders who are Christians going to Sharia court to submit their cases to the Sharia courts because they are conducted in local languages, not in English language like high courts, because there are less technicalities, and in many of them you don't need lawyers to adjudicate your dispute. And I think maybe we need to get better informed about some of these issues before we start making claims about them. But I would love to be corrected with specific examples of favors to Muslims, citizens of those states, that are not accorded to Christian citizens of that state because of the Sharia court or Sharia laws that were introduced. I'll stop here, Professor, as I said, but there are, I am sure, many issues to come up that we can have conversations on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are going to do that conversation after all the members of the panelists have spoken. Representatives from Niger, Mali, they've joined, and they said, quoting them, they want you to talk about the jihadist invasion of their countries. This may be beyond the scope of this conversation, but please write it down, at least to address their concern. Let me now turn to the distinguished Olorunfemi for his own opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Falola. Thank you very much to other members of the distinguished panel. Well, it's a privilege to be here, and it's been interesting listening to both Majid and Dr. Bukarti. But I think the topic says Trump versus Nigeria, or something like that, if I'm right. So I believe, as important as this conversation that we're having is, or that they have had is, I think we might be responding to an external trigger, and to take the conversation in the direction in which they have taken it, important as it is and great as it is, because we need to have that very important conversation. It might just mean that we have achieved for the external trigger what was desired, what was the plan. And then let me lay this foundation by quoting Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. I think he said sometime back that the Americans are excellent when it comes to strategic thinking. What they will need in 15 years' time, they will be looking for it right now. And I think that's what we're dealing with. Important as that conversation is, I think this is broader than the issue on the table. It's not just about Christian genocide or no genocide, country of particular concern, because we're dealing with the immediate issue on the table. But if you think back strategically, we realize that what we're dealing with today didn't start today. As far back as the year 2000, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has been advocating for the designation of Nigeria since 2001. That's about 20 years. And since 2009, they've been really at it, trying to get Nigeria designated as CPC. There was a bit of success in 2020, which was reversed by President Biden. So what am I saying? I'm saying what we're dealing with today didn't start today. It's not just about, as important as it is as for us to address the issue of insecurity within Nigeria, as important as it is to talk about the Sahel, Boko Haram, ISWAP, and all of that, and all of the things happening at Benue and Plateau. If you're not careful, we'll play into the hands of people who don't have an interest at that by having that conversation under this intense pressure. Important as it is, an important conversation to be had. So for me, I think it is important to situate what is happening within the right context. And to me, I would say what we have before us is a coincidence of many factors, but we must start out first by even understanding the nature of the relationship between Nigeria and America. We should ask ourselves why this sudden interest in Nigeria? Why this sudden interest in wanting to protect the Christians and ensure that they no longer face persecution, or that those ones who have been victims of genocide are protected? Why that interest? What has America always wanted to have in Nigeria? What does Nigeria want from America? What are the factors that are governing that relationship? What are the things of interest to us? Unless we identify those issues and see why President Trump would have this, what some have seen, and I agree to it, as sudden interest in Nigeria, then we might be far away from being able to identify what we're dealing with. I would say that it's not a coincidence that we're faced with what we are faced with at the moment. There are a lot of factors that are at play. You first start with the Gulf of Guinea. There has been an abiding interest of the Americans in the Gulf of Guinea. And it's not just America. There's an international interest. There's Russia, there's India, there's China, because the Gulf of Guinea is a very strategic, or it's of strategic importance to the world. It's of strategic importance because there are like 17 countries, and that's an important trade route. And apart from that, you have vast oil reserves, gas reserves, and all of that, and the implications of all of that for international trade and all that. So that is one. There are other issues that have, the America is interested in that, and we have to pay attention to that. You talk about the geopolitical considerations that has brought in Russia and China, the level of interaction, the level of relationship that Nigeria has had with China and Russia that is of interest to America. Those are the things that are important. Those are the things that we must consider. Those are the things that we must put on the table and see if we are really dealing with the issue, or we have reduced the issue to just narrow it down to one of Christian genocide or persecution. Important as that is, I repeat, it is not the most important thing, I would dare say. I believe that America is looking for something, and that's legitimate, because people have argued that President Trump is transactional. There's a negative, well, maybe negative to some country, but I don't think it is necessarily negative. International relations itself is transactional. I mean, you want something from someone, and the other person wants something from you. So at every point in time, it's for you to be able to wear your strategic thinking hat well and know what people on the other side want, and see how you can be able to strike a balance, to be able to give to Mr. Hay what he wants, and be able to take from them, maximize that relationship to your own benefit, because it's a game. It's a game. The important thing is to be able to ensure that it's not is one that will be a win-win one. And I think that's where Nigeria has lagged behind. I think we failed at the level of strategic thinking because we've not really put mind to being strategic in terms of our relationship, not only with America, but with other countries. We have the Gulf of Guinea. There's been some effort in that regard, but we need to think deep and dig deep, particularly right now that we know that President Trump is not the conventional precedent. It's not one for diplomacy as we've always known it. So it is important for Nigeria to understand the nature of the world we're dealing with, the multidimensional world, understand the nature of President Trump, understand what America wants, and understand then that what we're dealing with is not just about CPC, but much more. Now, what we have on the table is a consortium of different interests that have narrowed down to this particular issue and latching onto it as if this is the most important thing, as if this is of primary interest to them. Not necessarily. You think, look at the senator, the American senator who has been at the forefront of this. We've been able to track relationship. People have been able to track the relationship between him and the lobbyists representing a particular separatist group. So that tells you that what we're dealing with is not just about Christian genocide in Benue Plateau, but agitation by a separatist group, latching onto this particular issue as a prop to achieve an objective that is not necessarily what is being put on the table. So it's important that we isolate the right issues, identify all of these issues at stake. We need to understand where, okay, for instance, another thing that I left out has to do with the Niger Republic. You know that there was a break in relationship between America and Niger following the coup, and America had to leave. The base that was set up in Niger is no longer there. America is looking for a base. Would that be why there's this renewed interest in Nigeria? We have to think about that. The question of AFRICOM is there. You remember at the start, as of 2007, when George Bush wanted to set up AFRICOM in Africa, Nigeria led other countries to say no to that. But only a few years down the line, African countries started to see that might have been a good idea to have the base. Even Nigeria, even our own President Buhari once canvassed for the base to be returned to Africa. And I think America is really looking to be able to have a foothold in Africa. Perhaps that is one of the reasons why there's pressure on Nigeria at the moment. So I think that should do for now, because I just want to draw our attention to the fact that there are many issues that should be on the table so that we don't get lost in the maze of thinking that designation as country of particular concern or the issue of genocide, while that is important, it might not be what is most important to them outside, whereas they are putting that as a matter of...
Thank you very much for looking at this issue from its external dimension. We are going to return to many of these subsequently. Let me now call on Ms. Olorunfemi Baruwa to make her opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Falola, my fellow panelists, and everyone joining this important discussion from around the world. A lot has been said, so I'll try not to repeat most of it, but I would like to situate the moment we're in, talking about the Trump presidency and what it means for Nigeria from a slightly different angle, which is how do these global political shifts affect the lives of ordinary Nigerians, especially women, young people, and the most marginalized. Because when superpowers sneeze, countries like ours often catch a cold, and sometimes it's the most vulnerable who fall sick first. For me, the return of Donald Trump to the White House is not simply a change in US leadership. It represents a broader shift towards nationalism, unilateralism, and a more ideological foreign policy. For a country like Nigeria, which is Africa's largest democracy, and we've all mentioned the deep security, economic, and migratory ties that we have to the US, these shifts are very, very profound, and they matter because they somehow affect how we are perceived, how we are engaged, and how our internal dynamics are interpreted on the global stage. I know that Dr. Bukarti talked about numbers. Well, some of the ones flying around is the US congressional records of July 2025, which reference the Open Doors 2025 World Watch List that more than 3,000 Nigerian Christians had been killed out of about 4,500 worldwide in the period cited, and arguing that Nigeria had thus become sort of like the epicenter of faith-based violence. Some churches and advocacy groups describe the violence as Christian genocide. In response, of course, very quickly, a lot of institutions, the Nigerian government rejected the framing, and the Supreme Council of Islamic Affairs said that the designation is political cynicism and denied that any genocide is underway, pointing instead to factors like poverty, criminality, ecological change, environmental issues as root causes of violence. Even the BBC did report that the figures cannot be independently verified. Here again, for me, this creates a diplomatic pressure, and that Nigerian sovereignty is directly implicated when a foreign power effectively labels it a violator of religious freedom. Internally, the government is challenged to deliver not only security, but credible investigations, accountability, and protection across faith communities. However, we must be clear that two realities can exist. Even if an international court or forensic inquiry does not ultimately find a legal case of genocide as narrowly defined under international law, and many speakers here are being for and against that, that does not erase, for me, the lived reality on the ground. That, and there is mounting evidence of a sustained campaign of targeted violence, like Majid mentioned, of displacement and dispossession of Christian communities in parts of the North, in the Middle Belt, in the Northeast, and the rest. There are others who also cite ethnic cleansing due to the pattern nature of attacks, including the burning of villages, forced flight, seizures of land, renaming of communities, and systemic marginalization without, of course, collapsing the causation into one single legal label. A sober, evidence-based response would demand documentation, and I think Dr. Bukarti mentioned that, accountability and protection, not just, absolutes that are rhetorical. So it's unfair to discountenance the sufferings or pain of one group over others, because I still maintain that two truths can exist at the same time. Now, the designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern is a label which is typically reserved for nations accused of severe religious persecution and has major implications. It influences military cooperation, arms sales, foreign investment, and overall reputational standing. But beyond policy, it risks oversimplifying internal conflicts. The reality on ground is that whether in the Northeast, in the Middle Belt, or the Northwest, or even in the southern parts of the country, there are far more complex issues going on rather than a single narrative of religious persecution. We know that the drivers of insecurity in Nigeria are layered. We know that there are historical grievances, there is poverty, there is youth unemployment, there is climate pressure, there is weak justice system, there is porous borders, arms proliferation, and the long-standing failure to address structural inequality. These drivers always interact to produce multidimensional crises that affect all Nigerians, whether they are Christian, Muslim, or minority groups. At the same time, there is also this growing narrative internationally that Nigeria is witnessing a genocide against Christians. And so I want to be clear, and I've said it earlier, that Christian communities are experiencing devastating violence. And I do agree with Dr. Majid. They're experiencing displacement and they're experiencing grief. Muslim communities are doing the same, and both can raise the issue of genocide if they want, but discountenancing what is a particular group is raising that is affecting them. It's the person who wears a shoe that knows where it pinches. And so Christian communities are experiencing this devastating violence and displacement and grief. And these tragedies must be acknowledged with empathy and urgency. Yes, the term genocide carries significant legal and political weight, and using it without nuance risks, deepening the divisions at home and inviting external interventions, like Dr. Bukarti said, but that may, of course, inflame the situation rather than ease the tensions. And Nigeria's conflicts are not solely religious. We all know they are intertwined with land use, climate, and the rest of them, like I've mentioned. It is also important to emphasize the gendered and social inclusion dimensions of this crisis. Whenever insecurity escalates, women and girls pay the highest price through abduction, trafficking, sexual violence, loss of livelihood, and disruption of education. People with disabilities also face heightened vulnerability. Young people face shrinking opportunities and increased risk of recruitment into armed groups, which we're already seeing today. They are the fodder for many of the armed groups that we have, young people, because of unemployment. And if global economic relations tighten through reduced aid or stricter migration policies or the chilling effects of the CPC designation, the vulnerabilities, the differential vulnerabilities that these groups already face will intensify even further. The risk is that inequality widens and social fractures deepen. Yet, I believe that this moment also offers an opportunity for introspection. This designation notwithstanding and the global debates around Nigeria's stability, for me, is a wake-up call. It's not a moment to trade who is more affected or impacted by insecurity. Even one person in a Christian community or 10,000 people in a Muslim community or vice versa, a life is a life. It's a moment for us to strengthen accountability, to rebuild trust between citizens and security institutions, to invest in community-driven peace initiatives, and to address the structural drivers of insecurity. We need a security architecture that is not just reactive and militarized, but preventive, community-centered, intelligence-driven, and inclusive of women, youth, and local actors. And we must own our narrative by communicating clearly with evidence about what is happening in Nigeria, not trying to protect one religion or uplift the other over another. We should neither deny the suffering nor allow external factors to define our internal realities. For me, in this age of shifting geopolitics, Nigeria cannot rely on external partners to safeguard our democracy, to promote social cohesion or national stability. We must anchor our response in our own agency. We must strengthen governance. We must protect the civic space. We must invest in gender equality and tackling insecurity at its roots. If we do this with honesty and commitment, we can, of course, navigate this turbulent global moment with clarity and confidence. I'll stop here for now, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have more officials of states from Ghana. We are very grateful. Gambia, we are very grateful. They will send questions, which I will read subsequently. So, to the great man, Azu, it's your turn now.
All right. So thank you very much, Prof. And warm greetings to my colleagues on the panel and also to folks from all over the continent and from all over the world who have joined us to have this very important conversation. Now, I would like to dial back to the point made by Simbo. I think somehow he's dropped off the call because my colleagues have made very incisive comments on different aspects of the matter at hand. But I'd like to dial back to the point about Trump versus Nigeria, which was actually the topic that that Prof invited us to talk about. Of course, that's not to say the other points that have been made are not very important. They obviously are. I think that one may say really it's a conversation. It's not just a conversation about Trump versus Nigeria, but I guess it's Trump versus the world, Trump versus the rest of the world. And it would depend on which Trump shows up at your, at the front of your door. And, so, and it's interesting because anecdotally, and I'd like to just go back a bit, the experience we've had anecdotally is that Africa, and Nigeria in particular, has always had it good when Republican presidents are in the White House. Of course, we will remember that in the first wave of independence in Africa, it was President Eisenhower, who was president at the time, that put pressure on many of the colonial holders to press for independence for Africa, Ghana and the rest of the countries that gained independence at that time. And even more recently, I'm sure that we will recall that as controversial as President George W. Bush may have been, his intervention, especially regarding HIV/AIDS, was under PEPFAR, was the most significant intervention in health in history. And that again was obviously a Republican president. And then, of course, under him as well, that was when this whole business of AFRICOM started. I am saying this to provide context that we have always enjoyed the luxury, if you like, of believing that we usually have exceptionally iconic deals under Republican president. But here you are. We've had President Trump, and in his second time coming. Well, many of us, I'm sure, first encountered Trump decades ago, probably in 1987, when he wrote his most famous book, one of his most famous books, The Art of the Deal. And so when he contested for presidency the first time, the expectation obviously was that, we are going to have, to use his phrase at that time, there was going to be a draining of the swamp from Washington, and that many countries across the world were somehow going to benefit from that. But we would recall that it was in fact towards the end of his first tenure as president that Nigeria was first designated as a country of particular concern. We will also remember that the first warning sign was when he made the statements about Africa and some other countries being, to use that phrase, the shithole, and so forth and so on. So those were clear early warning signs that we're not going to have it as easy as we thought we would have it. Now, I think that so that's where we've been with Trump in his first comment, and then here we are. And I remember, in fact, when he made the second attempt, there was an editorial written by the Leadership newspaper on the 2nd of November 2020, when he attempted to the second time, entitled "Trump is a Danger to Nigeria's Democracy." I still remember that front page editorial very clearly. Now, it does seem that whatever it was that the writers of that editorial saw at that time is obviously what we are living through at this time. So, but let me deal, my colleagues have done a great job in covering substantial part of the conversation, but about Trump versus Nigeria, about the wider issues between America and the US. We know, for example, that Trump, being the man who considers himself to be the most successful businessman, there are at least over 350,000 Nigerians currently in the US. So in terms of the numbers, the United States of America probably has the largest Nigerian diaspora population. But if you look at what interests Trump, which is transaction, if you look at the 10 top trading countries with Nigeria, US is at number 4. That chart will show you clearly that China tops, India follows, Spain follows, and then the US is 4th on that particular list. Could this, as some of my colleagues have suggested, be part of what President Trump is interested in influencing? I don't know, I'm just putting it out there and saying it is worth having a conversation about, given his reputation, which he wears on his sleeve as a businessman who has come to change the narrative and redeem the United States from the country that has been ripped off by many parts of the world in terms of the balance sheet between US and other countries for trade. Now, I'd like to just highlight very quickly some of the issues that have become salient since this designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern was highlighted, and then the very famous second post which he made on Truth Social, that he was going to descend on Nigeria guns are blazing. Now, that conversation about his descending on Nigeria, guns are blazing, raised certain critical concerns, which I'd like to share, just about 5 of them, and then I'll pause so that we can expand the conversation wider, because my colleagues have covered a significant area of the significant aspects of the conversation we're having this evening. So the first concern that raised about coming to Nigeria, guns are blazing, and to to save Christians from from the genocide in a fast, vicious, and swift manner, has raised serious concerns, and the concerns are as follows. One, there are sovereignty fears concern. Article 2.4 and Article 2.7 of the UN states clearly that one state cannot threaten to levy war or aggression on another country. So obviously there is this genuine concern in Nigeria that could this, as some of my colleagues have suggested, be a red herring? Is this a smokescreen? We do not deny that Nigeria, there are serious problems of killings of Christians. And as Majid also said, and I align my point with that view, that Christians, you really cannot deny somebody of what they say they are feeling. And it's up to the Nigerian government and the Nigerian state to examine closely these challenges and then find how to deal with it, whether it's killing of Christians or killing of Nigerians, because no Nigerian life should be treated with levity. So the first point for me is the concern about sovereignty, and especially as expressed under Article 2.4 and Articles 2.7 of the UN Convention. The second one, of course, is obviously the misframing of the narrative of violence. The misframing of violence has raised serious concern in Nigeria. Is this really is it a decoy for a larger, for a larger intervention or a larger interest that is at play, or is it really something that is seen from the lens of course, we know that intervention, some have also said correctly, and I get the point, that it's not really so much about Nigeria as it is about President Trump's base in the US. That when he talks about Christian genocide, how do you, for example, align that side by side with interventions that we have seen in other parts of the world and some of the things that have happened? How do you, for example, align that with what is happening in Gaza, which is probably the clearest example of genocide? What has been the position of the United States in what is happening in Gaza? So the framing or misframing is also something that has created, in my view, some serious concern back home. And then, of course, the third point is the potential impact on aid and diplomacy. And I've also heard the argument that the intervention since Trump came, the cutback that has significantly affected US support and US aid, especially in terms of the US, especially in terms of its aid in the health sector, is something that will potentially cause more harm and more havoc to vulnerable groups that Ms. Baruwa has pointed out than the consequences of the unfortunate violence that we have had to deal with. So do you cut your head to spite your nose, for example? So that, in my view, is also another point that has been raised. And of course, there is the concern about internal cohesion and sectarian risk. That raising this kind of issue, however well-meaning or however well-intentioned, will potentially cause more harm than good. For a country that is so, the fault line, one of our biggest fault lines, obviously, is religion, of ethnicity. These are huge fault lines. So even however well-meaning President Trump may be in his concern, I am sure that the outcome of his intention is not to cause more harm than good. And of course, there is the fifth point of data and credibility gap. You would ordinarily expect that, a country like United States, and given the kind of resources that it has, if it's going to make an intervention on the basis of no life is worth losing on the basis of availability or non-availability of data. No life. But if you are going to make this case for whatever it is worth, you would ordinarily expect that there would be some basis in terms of data for supporting the engagement. And this has been a matter of concern. And of course, the other point, which is the final point on which I'd rest for now, is the regional and geopolitical fallout of the point that of this coming to Nigeria, guns are blazing. We remember that US cannot claim not to be partly responsible for the spike in violence, especially in the Sahel. We remember that the fall of Libya have significantly affected violence in the entire sub-region, because light arms became, the region was literally overwhelmed. And that, of course, also affected Nigeria. So there is also, I would expect, a certain level of humility. If the US was going to call out Nigeria and what is happening, I'd expect a certain level of humility, because the US itself cannot claim not to have any role or responsibility in what we have seen, whether in terms of the activities of ISWAP or in the activities of Boko Haram and the other franchises of violence that we have seen and witnessed in the sub-region. So, and it's also important for us to keep in mind, Nigeria, a country of 230 or 200 million people, whichever figure you choose, anything that potentially destabilizes Nigeria will have implications not only for Nigerians, but also for the sub-region and beyond. This, in my view, is the reason why I think, however well-meaning the intervention may be, I think that perhaps if the approach had been different, and let's also keep in mind that under President Jonathan, at the height of the Boko Haram insurgency, President Jonathan reached out to the US to ask for help, to ask for cooperation. But for all sorts of reasons, that help was never forthcoming. Of course, we know that there are challenges in the military high command, and we have seen some of those things. But was it impossible to not to throw away the baby with the bathwater, as we saw? But that was exactly what happened. That help wasn't forthcoming, and so the mutation of ISWAP to Boko Haram and to banditry and all sorts of franchise of violence that we are seeing is also a consequence of the help that was late in coming or never coming under some of the previous governments that we have had. This does not exculpate of, say the governments, some of that our governments have played the role that they ought to, play. Because I have a conviction and a view that if the government, if previous Nigerian governments and the Nigerian state had been more focused and committed and more transparent and held itself more accountably in dealing with this issue of violence, we probably will not be where we are today. But I guess that as we say in this part of in this neck of the woods, it's when you wake up that it's your that is your money. So we take this as a wake-up call, and then of course the question is, where do we go from here? What steps do we need to take as a country, not for the sake of Trump, but for the sake of our own citizens, whom the Nigerian government and the Nigerian state come into power and take a vow that the protection of Nigerians and the people and property is the first and singular most important reason why governments exist. I think that is where we are. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. I want to change the procedure a little because the Sahelian delegates are pressuring me tremendously. They are listening to this conversation, representing Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. The questions are very difficult, and I will moderate the language, which is extremely provocative. So they say Nigeria is an irresponsible country, and its tragedy is yet to begin. That they led a delegation to Nigeria when Gaddafi fell to buy all the arms that the Nigerian government refused. That the Nigerian government did not handle their exit from ECOWAS with maturity, using threat, and it serves them right, quoting them, that Trump is just threatening them just as Nigeria threatens Niger, as from a high-ranking official. And that they are looking as jihadists are about to destroy Mali, not saying anything, not doing anything. And if those states collapse, they are all moving to Nigeria, whether as terrorists or as internally displaced. And then you will know and see the beginning of your real problem. Those are very difficult questions. They are futuristic. It's another form of threat that we have to take very seriously. Please, can you please respond to this? Because they are listening. Maybe 2 minutes each, that you are part of a regional complex that is being destabilized, and Nigeria is not using its stature to solve this issue, and that danger is coming. Anyone? All of you? Dr. Bukarti, you want to respond? Yes? Yes, go ahead. Sir,
Well, okay.
Go ahead, Majid, go ahead.
Can I speak?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. First and foremost, I also was one of those who fought Nigeria's diplomatic adventure in Niger when the coup happened, for some of the reasons raised by that respondent. But that is not the topic for today. My interest there was when he talked about jihadists overrunning the entire Sahel and Nigeria being at risk. And I actually agree with him. But the question we should ask as Nigerians is this: how come when Libya was destabilized and the free flow of arms across the region became such a proliferated issue that it triggered insecurities and instability in the region, how come jihadism made a landfall from the Sahel in Nigeria, not in Ghana, not in Ivory Coast, not in Togo, not in Senegal, not even up north in Nigeria, in Tunisia, or even in Egypt? Why is Nigeria such an attractive destination for jihadi movements across the Sahel? That is the question we as Nigerians should be asking. And that is why I have said severally that the Nigerian soil, particularly in its northern part, is very fertile for the planting and the germination of violent extremism that often results into jihadism. And that is where the problem, the root of the problem we're discussing today, that is where it started from. And I have said it severally. You see, there's a link between persecution of Christians by state authorities, institutional framework, and what later manifested by way of violent jihadism that also saw the killing of Christians, and we're not debating genocide or otherwise. That is because the ideas, in fact, if you ask me, the jihadists, what I call them Boko Haram or not, are simply trying to put to practice what has been demonstrated in the mainstream, what has also been preached over time, that has indoctrinated and radicalized an entire generation of northern Muslims, beginning from the early 70s. So it is receptive to the very idea of
Okay.
and find roots.
Your internet is
with today.
Okay.
Are things that are
Dr. Dahiru, we'll come back to you because your internet is, your internet is creating trouble. Okay.
A hotspot for jihadism. The reason why jihadism does not make it other countries, it is because Islamism has not been allowed in any country, as is the case in Nigeria. So, for instance, state governments begin to introduce Sharia laws in their states, and you have a group fighting Sharia law all over Nigeria.
Oh, please, we'll come back.
Ideological convergence.
Yeah,
your mainstream. Religion sect of Boko Haram. And fundamental. Can you hear me now?
Let's come back to you because your internet is failing.
Okay, like what I'm trying to say is simple. Yeah. It's has been allowed to thrive in Nigeria for a very long time now, unbridled and unchecked. And it is because of this that northern Nigeria especially has become an attractive destination for jihadists globally, as against the cases of other West African countries and even majority of West African countries, and even North African countries. Morocco is there, Tunisia is there, Algeria is there. They've been able to combat this issue. So the solution to prevent the Armageddon that was predicted by the respondent for the Sahel is to use the current Trump demonstration as a shock therapy. This is not about Trump. It's not about the Americans. It's about us to roll back the tendency of Islamism, not Islam, Islamism. What is Islamism? An ideology that believes that the state must be administered in line with Islamic religious principles, especially in a multi-religious society like Nigeria. Okay. This is the real problem.
Thank you.
And so we need to reverse this from the mainstream. We need to secularize this country and bring it in conformity, in fidelity with that constitution that all of us as Nigerians sat down together to adopt, and we all swore, each swore by our holy books to uphold. So when you now understand that document and introduce religious law, that becomes un-Islamic because you have betrayed trust of the Nigerians of other faith.
Okay. Let's go back to Mazrui some years ago, making the proposition that why don't we see Nigeria as an Islamic republic and begin to adjust to that reality by, in another 30 years, the projection is that Nigeria will become close to between 400 and 450 million. And that the majority of that population, given the birth rate, will be Muslims. So there are two possibilities. Either it implodes or we begin to say, okay, is this an Islamic republic in the making? And begin a process of adjustment. It's a very, all the questions so far are extremely provocative, but that is the idea of bringing highly skilled and intelligent people to a conversation like this. Bukarti, you want to brave that?
I mean, yeah, Prof, I wanted to go back to the Sahelian delegation message, which you asked us to take 2 minutes or so to respond to.
Yeah.
That message you said came from a high-level person from the Sahel. Yes. It's extremely disappointing what he said. What he said is only right in one perspective, that Nigeria has a big role to play in securing the Sahel because part of Nigeria is also considered as the Sahel. But what we are seeing in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and especially Mali today was brought to those countries by selfish military dictators who decided to take over power in their country using a false pretense. The militaries in all of the three countries, when they took over power, they said they toppled the democratically elected governments in the countries because the democratically elected governments have failed to secure the country. When each of us know that it is the duty of the military to secure the countries, it is their duty to defend the countries. They failed in their responsibilities. They then blamed it on the democratically elected governments and took over. And what happened when they took over? Number one, they do not have experience and know-how on managing countries. They are military leaders who are skilled in their job, I admit, but they are not politicians, they are not administrators, And they failed even when they were only focusing on security. And now they took over and they became politicians. Who is to fight the terrorist groups in their countries? They were supposed to fight them. They failed when they were focusing only on them. Now they have taken over power. They have become politicians. They have become administrators, and they are also responsible for defending the integrity of their countries. And what did they do next? They went to this populist idea because they wanted to consolidate their powers. They expelled their French partners. They expelled the Americans. They expelled the UN troops, about 13,000 of them, the 13,000 French troops, and they invited the Russians, who brought only 800 Wagner fighters to Mali. And they charged the Malian government reportedly $10 million per month for the 800 Wagner fighters. And they failed. And now Mali is being brought to its knees because of the choices they made. And to blame that on Nigeria is beneath them. And it is insecurity, yeah, it's happening, but it is not going to come and eat Nigeria because you have failed your own country. You should go and fix what you have. I mean, look at how they withdrew from the ECOWAS, and they are saying Nigeria threatened them. Where did Nigeria threaten any Sahelian country? It was the ECOWAS, only that the Nigerian president happened to be the chairman of ECOWAS at the time that happened. If we want to succeed,
yeah, but what about what they said, that you are going to witness massive migration of people to your country?
I mean, that's what they wish. What I wish is for Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to retrace their steps and to secure their countries. We love them. They are our neighbors. They are our brothers and sisters, and we love to see their countries secure. But for you to predict that your countries are going to fall and then they would come and then destroy Nigeria is beneath a high-level person, and I think that they should do much better. Prof, okay. I was going to succeed, Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, and all of these countries, we have to work together. Prof, when right now, Boko Haram in the Lake Chad region and the groups in the Sahel, ISIS, Islamic State, Sahara Province, and Jamaatul Nasratul Islam wal Muslimin in Janim in the Sahel, they have Telegram groups, they have WhatsApp groups, they are coordinating, they are sharing information and message and sharing experiences. The Nigerian government and the Niger and Malian government are not doing that. So those that we are saying they are uneducated, they are terrorists, they are more skilled. They know better that they would only succeed working together. And the military juntas in Niger, they are the ones who would do themselves. They were not expelled from any organization. Nigeria did not expel them. In fact, Nigeria is visiting Niger. They are trying to re-establish the cooperation, and I think the Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso government will do better to stop blaming their neighbors like Benin. You see them blaming Benin, spreading conspiracy theories. The Niger president himself last time was on the media blaming the Nigerian government and claiming that the Nigerian government had entered into a treaty with the terrorist groups to take control of some parts of Nigeria for some political reasons. And there was no evidence to support any of that. I think they should stop that. They should focus on their countries. They made this choice and they should live by the choice they made.
Also, that difficult question, why don't you imagine Nigeria as an Islamic republic?
Well, Prof, it is not, and we have a constitution that claims that declares that very clearly. And I would not imagine anything that we already, even as a secular country, we have enough, which is what the constitution recognizes. We have enough problem and enough challenges. I think that exactly is at the heart of this conversation, that we really do have to find a way of making our country better within the sort of framework that currently exists, instead of thinking of how to compound and complicate our problems. But I agree with Dr. Bukarti, and I would just need to add this, that the neighbors, the people that, I mean, the gentlemen that you have mentioned or referenced in this call, their countries are living by the choices that they have made. But it's also important to draw a distinction between the elites and the few people in government and the mass of the people of that country. I have a feeling, and this is just a knack feeling that I have, that the desire of the majority of the people in the sub-region is to live and exist as one. Certainly governments have failed. I mean, the governments in many countries across the world, there's a decline of trust in governments and in institutions. I also differ slightly from the point that Dr. Bukarti made in terms of the role that some of these foreign governments have played. It is true, I mean, and you can go and read this from Tom Borges's book, The Looting Machine, where Tom Borges clearly, states the challenges that some of these countries have, by the way that they have conducted themselves in the search for raw materials, in the search for minerals, how they have conducted and impoverished a number of these countries. So that is a reality. But unfortunately, that reality affects the greater population of the people.
You having internet challenges? If you have internet challenges and your internet comes back, just let us know. So,
who are making this proposal is for them to return to the path of reason, and that door is still open. That door for them to return is still open, and that's not only just going to be for their own benefit as the elite, but for the benefit of their own citizens. I think that if governments learn to put their citizens first before their personal interests, would have a far different have far different countries and a far better governed continent than we currently have. I think that really that is the challenge, that they have made wrong choices, but it is not too late for them to return, instead of to wish that their country will collapse and that Nigeria will bear the brunt of it. I do not see that as a path of honor. Thank you.
Okay. So please cross-examine, cross-talk among yourself before I ask you questions. Dr. Bukarti and Dahiru, some disagreements?
Yeah, I mean, Prof, even when Majid talks about Nigeria being the most attractive or fertile ground for terrorism from the Sahel, I don't know what he is talking about. Because the fighters we are talking about in Nigeria, except for the Lakurawa who have recently crossed into northwestern Nigeria, in the northeast, this is a problem that is homegrown. People were radicalized on the ground. It was not fighters from somewhere coming here. I mean, there are now evidence of some Caucasians fighting with ISWAP. I have seen photos of 2 or so of them. And his point that Boko Haram is practicing what was taught in majority mainstream northern Nigeria is complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense. There is no evidence for that. And that's why, Professor, from the beginning of Boko Haram to today, the highest estimate of the number of their fighters is 7,000. There are at least 100 million people in northern Nigeria. 7,000 is 0.007% of the population. If it is mainstream teaching, why were they rejected by the majority Muslims? Why did they target the mosques they were targeting? Why did they target the markets, the bus garages, and everywhere they were targeting? Why did they declare all of us as non-believers, Muslims from northern Nigeria? Boko Haram's leader, Shekau, issued 5 death threats on me publicly. And I am a Muslim. I am profoundly religious. I pray 5 times a day, but he doesn't see me as Muslim. And I completely reject his interpretation of Islam. And for Majid to say that was the mainstream that was being then implemented by Boko Haram we can do better. Please, let's research better on some of these issues.
So,
and when he talks about
Are you
Boko
saying
Haram,
there is no Islamic factor? Are you saying there is no Islamic factor in this crisis?
No,
if so, who is
my argument, I mean, I have published over 50 articles, mostly on the ideology of Boko Haram. And my argument is that they are using Islamic teachings, they are using Islamic scriptures, but they are misinterpreting them after misunderstanding them, and they are misapplying them. And that the teachings they are using, many of them are mainstream Islamic teachings, which they then twisted into their wrapped interpretation of Islam, which is rejected by the overwhelming majority of Muslims in northern Nigeria. And that's why they are a fringe group by all accounts. And when he says, Prof, that Boko Haram's aim is to extend the Sharia that was implemented in the 12 states The first thing Boko Haram did was to reject that Sharia. Boko Haram's leader, Muhammad Yusuf, was made a member of the committee of the Sharia Implementation Committee in Yobe State, which is the state I come from. Before he founded Boko Haram, he resigned from that committee and he said that was fake Sharia. And how do you then argue that it is the same Sharia he wants to extend to other states? When we talk about secularity or secularism, there are different types of secularism. Some are like the French version that is averse to religion, that is hostile to religion. Others are accommodative to religion and they allow plural religions to exist. And that's the type we have in Nigeria. The Nigerian constitution says, yeah, that Nigeria should be a secular state, but governments and the constitution itself recognizes Nigeria as a plural country, and government institutions were encouraged to encourage coexistence and give a level playing field for all religions in the country. And I think that's the best way to go. Prof, I don't know of anywhere in the world, any other country that is like Nigeria. Every country you go to is either overwhelmingly Christian or overwhelmingly Muslim or Buddhist or other religion. In Nigeria, it's almost 50-50 split, with the most recent Pew data saying 50% Muslim, 45% Christian, and others saying other figures that are close to this. In that kind of environment, you need to manage the plurality, the coexistence, and I think exaggerating things and mischaracterizing things is not going to help us.
Okay, thank you for the pushback. Ms. Baruwa.
Thank you, Prof. While I
When I'm coming to you, I'm coming to Majid, I'm coming to you.
While I
come to
agree
you.
with
Very important
Dr.
response.
I'll come to you.
And I do understand Dr. Dahiru's point as well. I just want to raise an issue with Dr. Bukarti, which might be responsible for some of the points that Dr. Dahiru made. And he made two examples. One is the example of Deborah, the lynching of Deborah Yakubu, a second-year college student university student in Sokoto. I think the other one was I think that Mrs. Chioma Agbahime, also, who was beheaded, the example that you made in Kano. And now, what Dr. Majid said is the view of a lot of people in Nigeria, because when these things happen, and I've lived in northern Nigeria, Dr. Bukarti, for 30 years, and as a Yoruba woman who is Christian, I sit in a place where I straddle both religions. I have family members that are Muslims. I have family members that are Christians. Yesterday, I was still in a Muslim prayer and I was reciting everything. Everyone was wondering, because we grew up like that in Lagos. Now, what happens when these things happen? I think what brings the pushback from a lot of people is the fact that many Muslims come up to defend some of these atrocities. When Deborah happened and when Chioma Agbahime happened, there were Muslims on social media and everywhere who said, yes, they blasphemed and this is why they were killed. Some of these issues, so that's where I see that organizations like the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs should be condemning some of these issues. Unfortunately, that is the time they say that the person blasphemed or they are completely silent. I remember the case of Deborah. There were 40 senior advocates of Nigeria, Muslim senior advocates, who came up to defend the culprits. I think this double speak sometimes, for want of a better word, forward-looking progressives like you and Islamic scholars like you and Dr. Majid and Dr. Bukarti, who believe in this, should be able to come up during such times to assail the thinking around this period. Otherwise, this narrative that these are, and I love the distinction you made, that they could be Muslims, but they are not practicing the Islamic injunctions. And I agree with you with that, because I have lived and grown up with a lot of Muslims, and this is not the practice.
No, thank you very much. I think you spoke very well, my sister. Just 2-3 issues in relation to that point. Number one, when Majid was recounting this episode, he said the woman in Kano was killed because she denied someone performing ablution in front of her shop. And that's not true. the first thing we need to do is to get the facts straight.
Prof, I
The-
think
hold on.
this is becoming a monologue.
Okay.
I think this is becoming a monologue.
Okay.
Sorry, Prof, let me quickly
monologue.
make this point. The issue,
No.
understand that I am not justifying. I am not justifying when
Majid, please,
Prof,
please.
I will leave this platform now if you don't ask him to stop talking. I will leave
it's
right
all
away.
right. It's all right. It's all right.
I will
Please,
leave right now.
please don't do that. We are talking
Yes.
about. Hold on. We're talking about.
So we should,
Hold
this
on.
is the kind of respect we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is the conduct of a Muslim. All
No,
aggressive, looking for
no.
waging wars, insulting people. That is the Muslim. That is the Islamic projecting.
No.
I'm trying not to make this a debating competition. I'm trying not to tackle personality. I have my views, my opinions, well documented in my body of works, cited globally. So when I speak to my own opinion, you can speak to yours without necessarily interjecting me. It's called common sense. It's called decorum.
Please.
So when you use offensive languages like senseless, when you use arrogant demeanor to have this debate, you have simply proved those that are cynic about the conduct of an average Muslim very right. You are just talking, you are going on and on, spewing arrogance of ignorance, and you are impugning my personality. Do you think you're a better Muslim than myself? I know you were brought here because somebody coming here, I know. And you have displayed just that. You are trying hard to derail from the issue because you are not living out what you preach openly. We know your type.
That's enough. That is enough.
Sympathizer.
No,
That is
that's
why you
enough.
don't anything wrong with Sharia laws in Nigeria.
That's enough. That's enough. That's enough.
So, Prof,
that's enough. That is enough. Hold on 1 second. That's enough. So please, let's move to my questions, and then we'll bring in the audience. And they, okay, Dr. Majid, that's enough. That's enough. Okay, so sovereignty issue. Dr. Majid, sovereignty issue, please. There's the argument that if you cannot protect your citizens and if you cannot protect your boundaries, can you call yourself a sovereign state? Olorunfemi.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Thank you for bringing me on. This was my fear. I didn't want, like I said earlier on, I mean, this is what this would degenerate to. Let's go focus on Trump and Nigeria, or America and Nigeria. That's what this is all about. That's why I said the debate that was thrown at us, we're falling for it, unfortunately, because this was been played out in the media space in Nigeria. All of the conversation has been about trying to define what is genocide and what is not genocide, what is killing, what is persecution, what is and that, to me, is not what this is about. As important as that is, and unfortunately, okay, what was the question, Prof? You are talking about sovereignty and all of that.
Sovereignty, yes. That can Nigeria claim to be sovereign if it can protect its boundaries?
Is there a country that can? Yeah, is there really a country in the world we live in today? Is there a country that can confidently say that it can fully protect its people? Since terrorism, like when we talk about the multidimensional nature of the world, there are things that there was a time that countries believed they could live in isolation, even though President Trump believes in that even at this moment. But we've seen that the world is flat. There are dimensions to international relations or to interactions at the global level that has made nonsense of sovereignty in quotes. Terrorism is global. So, I mean, since one person can live thousands of miles away from a particular place and impact what is happening in another place, can we really be too sure about sovereignty still being defined in the narrow geographical sense of it? That's why, for me, for instance, I've I've queried the doctrine of concentric circles as been the propeller for the understanding of Nigerians' foreign policy over time. Because that idea that you are a sovereign nation, and the next most important to you as a sovereign nation are your immediate neighbors, and thereafter is Africa and the world. I think that's been redefined. That's why I'm saying, that's what I've been wanting for us to place on the table. Now that we understand, now that we can see that America has interest in Nigeria, can we situate what they want?
Thank you.
And
Also, why do you think, thank you, Simbo. Why do you think some groups in Nigeria like Trump?
Well, I really cannot speak for the groups that like, but I can just hazard a guess. I think there is this sentiment in many circles that he has come to, that under the Democrats, wokeism has, or what Trump himself later calls social engineering, has been taken very, very far. So I get the sentiment, especially around evangelical circles, both in the US and in Nigeria, saying, well, especially after the comments that President Trump made after he's swearing in, that's one of the reasons, in my view, why, especially why Trump is very popular especially among evangelical circles. But you see, sometimes people don't really understand. When people say these things, it's good for their own, it's good to hold as a crutch for their own faith. But I think that the question you may ask yourself, does Trump see himself really as a Christian? Does he so see himself? It's a good sentiment and a good bait for his domestic base, but does he see himself as a Christian? Because again, I like to go to the Middle East and to what is happening in the Middle East. There are more Arab Christians, more Palestinian Christians than there are Jewish Christians. And this is a matter of fact. But see what is playing out in Gaza. So this whole question of, identity politics, which is very convenient these days, is one that I find is a bait that people should take with some caution. When the President of the United States of America, for example, accepts, contrary to the provisions of the protocol of his office, accepts a luxury aircraft from a predominantly Muslim country, and really doesn't care much about what that means. What does that mean for people who think or perceive him to be a Christian president? Charge on trying to save or redeem the Christian faith. I do not go for that. I think I'd rather judge people by what they do than by what they say. And his actions so far, in my view, leave quite a bit to be desired.
Dr. Dahiru, suppose the Nigerian government sends a delegation to Trump and they said, look, why don't you give us leverage points? And this is Asu's question. Intelligence, capacity building, defense cooperation. In other words, our security, our infrastructure is not adequate to address these issues. Can you assist us?
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
In the course of my conversation around this issue, I have made this proposition already. The reason is this: if you look at the countries in the CPC, in the State Department's list of CPCs, there's one thing that does not necessarily or completely qualify Nigeria to be on that list. My sister Baruwa, Mrs. Baruwa said something about the legal and the political definition of genocide. While Nigeria might somewhat meet the legal definition, but the political definition is lacking, which is a saving grace for the Nigerian state. And what is lacking in the political definition of genocide in the case of Nigeria? If you look at countries like China that are in the CPC, countries like Saudi Arabia, and countries like Myanmar, In the case of Myanmar, they're in that CPC because of their persecution and extermination of their Muslim population, the Rohingya Muslims. That's on the basis upon which they're in that list. And because the concern for religious freedom is not restricted to Christianity by the United States, it's all religious groups. Now, in the case of China, for instance, China is in this list because of the persecution of its ethnic Uyghur Muslim community. The same thing in Saudi Arabia that does not allow any other region to exist on home soil. Now, in these three cases, the governments of these countries are actively aiding and abetting this level of religious suppression and severe, how do you call it now? Severe persecution. But the Nigerian state, at least at the central government level, cannot be said to be aiding and abetting either genocide of Christians, targeted killings of Christians, or the persecution of Christians. More so, we have a president today, that you can accuse of everything in this world. You can even accuse him of being a drug baron if he has an enemy. You can accuse him of being a certificate forger. But you can't accuse President Tinubu of being a religious bigot or a sympathizer to jihadi causes. Because that will mean that he is going to support the killing of his own children and family members who are Muslim Christians. So with this, the president can negotiate with the American authorities that, look, what this is happening, we've been trying to combat and contain them, but as a state, we are doing our best and we're not aiding and abetting it. This is something that the Nigerian state should have pointed out clearly. That while we acknowledge that there are concerns, legitimate concerns about persecution and targeted killings of Christians that may have been approaching genocidal proportion, the state, at least the central government, is not aiding and abetting it, as is the case of other countries in the list of American CPC. And I will tell you something today too. President Tinubu has also gone a notch higher to contain ISWAP by entering into a first deal with Emirates authorities. The United Arab Emirates have this authority where we've seen a transfer of enhanced military capabilities to the Nigerian side in its bid to carry out the final onslaught on ISWAP. Now, considering the friendly relationship between the Emirates and the United States, I think they can be approached to stand as a witness to the fact that the Tinubu administration, the federal government of Nigeria, is doing all it can to actually combat this menace of insecurity that threatens the Nigerian state and all of its peoples, Muslims and Christians. And the Qataris too, who are very friendly to the Tinubu administration and to Nigeria by extension, and also very friendly to the United States, can be approached to it so that if the American authorities are convinced that, look, this country does not particularly satisfy political efficiency because the government authority is not aiding and abetting whatever it is, and are willing to collaborate, I think this should be an opportunity. If indeed Donald Trump's intention really is to stop the Christians in Nigeria, and since the common denominator, the common killer of both Christians and Muslims have been identified, it will be very good for the Nigerian government to use some of this information I'm putting out now to leverage on the fact that they are not aiding and abetting it, to approach the American authorities for more collaboration, to put an end once and for all to insecurity in Nigeria. So I think there is hope. There is a way of, because the state, the Nigerian state, unlike the case in China, in Myanmar, in Saudi, and some other countries in the CPC list, does not aid and abet the persecution of other Christians or the genocide against Christians.
Thank you. Dr. Bukarti, should Nigeria revisit its relationship with China? Because one position is that, because there are many reasons why Trump is trying to talk that way, that is Nigeria going too far in its relationship with China in a way that is making US angry. Similar to what led to the death of Lumumba, that he was going to socialist and they should kill him, or similar to Nkrumah. Are we moving too close to China to incur the wrath of US?
I mean, so one thing with regards to this recent statement, Prof, is that we know that there are individuals and groups who have advocated for years for the kind of narrative Trump started using. We know recently it was Ted Cruz, but even before Ted Cruz, there were politicians who continued to advocate that there was a genocide, a Christian genocide in Nigeria. Here in the UK, there was a 3-year hearing by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Religious Freedom on this issue, and I attended every single sitting from the beginning to the end. And in the end, they produced a report with their findings, which some members of the hearing disagreed with. So the first thing we need to look at is that there are people who are whispering things into Trump's ears. And I think the Nigerian government has not done as well as it should have done in terms of establishing good relationship with the Trump administration. I don't know whether he was not invited, but Tinubu did not visit the United States of America since Trump became president. We don't have an ambassador there, even though the embassy officials might do some of what they can. But if you don't have an ambassador resident in the country, then there may be some difficulties to navigate. And then you have people whispering into Trump's ears. Now, it's interesting your question on China, because when the first time I saw China releasing a statement, the second time I saw China with our national security advisor and official from China also making the same statement, Nigeria needs to be very careful. China and the United States are two elephants who are fighting, and you don't want to be the grass under them. You don't want to be in the middle with China using you to trigger America and America trying to retaliate with you. It's a very, very dangerous position to be in. And so I think the Nigerian government has some work to do in terms of rebuilding our relationship with the Trump administration, but that doesn't mean going away from China, because China is a reality. They are projected by all accounts to be the most important country in the world in the coming years, if not already. And they are leading in technology, they are leading in lots of other places, and Nigeria needs what they have for the growth of our country. Now, one thing that one mistake Western governments have made, Europe and America, is that they are receding from Africa. They have always paid lip service to investment in Africa. They have not done enough in terms of investment. They send us aids, and aids never develop or grow countries. You need investment. China is investing massively, not only in Nigeria, but across Africa. They are leading now in technology and in rail. I mean, when I say technology specifically, I'm talking about cell phone. They are leading in that, and they are leading in rail under their rail and road projects. And they are taking over in lots of countries with those interventions. Now, also, Russia has been doing a lot on the African continent. When the US refuses to sell arms to the Nigerian government simply goes to Russia. And before the Ukrainian war, Russia was supplying 34% of arms and ammunition to African countries. And I think is the third major supplier or something like that in Africa. But of course, historically, Russia has used lots of levers to spread its tentacles on the African continent. We also now see friends of Russia and China also doing a lot, countries like Turkey and others, while the West is still receding. Trump says America first, and they cut aid. USAID is almost dead now. They are cutting aid. They are looking inward. The United Kingdom is cutting aid. They are changing. They changed the FCDO now, their agency. They are looking inward. They are coming back. They are receding while these countries are pushing into Africa. And maybe African countries need to understand better, because China and Russia may not be looking out for our best interests. Russia in particular is just looking for clientele countries, and our best friends will be countries in the West, but they need to do better. We have not seen transfer of technology for the decades they have promised. There is no good investment in Africa, and they are not treating African countries in the West. They are not treating African countries as the worthy neighbors that we are, and we cannot continue in that way. If they want better relationship with African, sorry, Prof, I am speaking for long. I'll stop here.
No, that's all right. That's
yeah,
all right.
Even in the diplomatic community, you can see that before 5 years, 10 years before now, the West can almost take for granted all the votes of the African countries. We voted with them. But see what happened with the Russian war. 14 to 15 African countries either abstained or voted with Russia. And the same thing is happening in other votes at the United Nations General Assembly and other organs. And that's to tell the West that they need to do better with their relationship with African.
Thank you. Resource politics. Resource politics. Gold, oil, earth minerals. What? Yes.
Can I? Okay.
Yes.
I thought you were done.
No, I'm not done, because I want us to have a conversation on the politics of these resources. So Trump is interested in these resources. There's no doubt about that. One data is suggesting that Nigeria has more earth minerals than Ukraine. It's not been confirmed. So how should Nigeria play this politics? If it's not using these resources, selling them to other countries, it becomes a political issue in which a country like US says, look, I want my share. China says it wants a share. How should the country play this politics? Ms. Baruwa.
Thank you, Prof. I initially wanted to just speak briefly about the last question around China's...
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
About China and Russia's growing influence in Nigeria. For me, I think it's a mixed picture. And while I appreciate Dr. Bukarti's response, I believe that it offers both opportunities and risk. You know, it has opportunities and it also carries a lot of risk for us. For like he mentioned, truly China provides infrastructure, you know, financing. China is, you know, way up there in technology. Even the trade opportunities between Nigeria and China are really growing, and that's what we urgently need for our balance of trade. But the implications include rising debt exposure and the limited technology transfer. So it's very opaque. There's a lot of tech, but there's no transfer of technology. And there's a model of engagement that China operates that often sidelines, you know, transparency. And I'm speaking as a human rights person, as a civil society person. So the model of engagement that China operates often sidelines transparency. It sidelines human rights. It sidelines local content. You know, I talked about limited technology transfer. So Nigeria must be able to negotiate from a position of clarity to avoid dependency and ensure that Chinese investments, you know, genuinely strengthen our long-term economic sovereignty. Russia, on the other hand, engages mainly through military cooperation. You did talk about weapons. I think Dr. Bukarti or Dr. Dahiru mentioned that. They do that through military cooperation, through political signaling and security partnerships. And you know, just to just backtrack a little about China, I just remembered, you know, that China did say that it was going to defend Nigeria, if you recall, during the CPC designation issue. Back to Russia, you know, while these engagements may fill the gaps in Nigeria's overstretched security architecture, it can also complicate our relations with other Western allies, especially at a time when, you know, the global geopolitics is more polarized. You know, Russian involvement may deepen militarization without properly addressing governance failures that drive insecurity. So in short, both powers can be useful partners, but Nigeria must approach them with strategic caution, not desperation. And we must ensure that the engagements support our national interests, that they improve governance outcomes, and they do not undermine our relationships in the West African and global diplomatic space. And many civil society actors will support me with this. In terms of the politics of resources and the interest of Trump and other world leaders, and your question about how Nigeria should play these politics with the world, for me, I think that it has to be practical and diplomatic. For how we play this politics, you know. First, we must declare or clarify our national interest framework. We must define that very well. We must be able to translate resources into concrete national goals, whether it's industrialization, jobs, revenue, energy, security, climate resilience, even though some of the world leaders, dispute that we have any climate issues. Then we must diversify partnerships, not just transactional. China, Russia, US, they could give us loans, they could give us aid and the rest of that. But we can't continue to be transactional in our relationship with them. We must work with these countries, and other regional partners simultaneously, and use competition among these partners, as they're all, it's like Africa is the bride and Nigeria is, is one of the biggest brides right now. We must use this competition among these global powers to secure better terms, but avoid exclusive dependence on any single patron. The third for me is that we must insist on local content and technology transfer. I mentioned that with Russia. We must strengthen contract transparency and renegotiation capacity. We must use our sovereign wealth strategy. We must leverage regional forums, and there's a whole lot that we must do. But there's one last one I wanted to mention, that we must be willing to mobilize diaspora and soft power, because we're really missing that. We have people who reside in these geographics that we can invest in institutions and not just personalities. Back to you, Prof.
So should the country be dissolved peacefully?
Is that question?
No, it's for us.
Dr. Bukarti, come to my rescue. Dr. Majid, you are the professor.
So,
No, my clear and unequivocal answer, Prof, is no. But let me
hold on, because small countries also do well.
Yes, and I'm not saying that on account of our size. We also know that China has the largest population in the world.
Okay.
And from all the accounts that we have seen, China is not doing badly at all. I don't think it's so much the population as how that population has been managed. And that also, very quickly, if I may say, Prof, also takes me back to the issue about China and Russia and geopolitics. I think it's very important for us to keep in mind, and I believe we do that a country only projects the extent, what we project is a reflection of what we are inside, okay? Nigeria has not always been perceived as a weak, struggling country. There was a time when, if Nigeria, to use Mrs. Baruwa's phrase, if Nigeria sneezed, the UK or other countries will catch a cold. But things have happened over the years that appear to have weakened that particular power base. I think we need to go back to that. But I also do not want to see Nigeria. A lot has already been said about the geopolitics, especially involving the major powers, whether it's Russia or it's China and all of those in between. But I think we also need to keep in mind that Africa is also missing in the game. It's good to trade with China, with all, being aware of what is involved. It's also good to trade with Russia and with the US and with Europe. But the question I keep asking is, how much trade, given the potential that exists within Africa itself, how much trade does Africa do with itself? Under the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, the terms of volume of trade in terms of percentages is only just moved in the last 1 or 2 years from about 7.3% to about 12.5%. That's not good enough. If you want to go to unlike Europe that sees itself largely as a single economic bloc and benefits hugely from that, and that also plays out in its geopolitics. If you want to, about 62% of the countries in Africa, you require a visa to travel. Now, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. So I think that first off, we need to look inwards and rebuild, ask ourselves, as we say, where did the rain begin to beat us? Fix that very well. And also see how we can optimize the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, because President Trump is not going to come to our aid in that, and he has made it very clear. As I also said at the beginning, remember that whereas about 350,000 or 500,000 Nigerians reside in the US, which is the biggest destination of Nigerian diaspora population, if you look at the pecking order of trade, US is fourth on the list. It could be one of the signals that Trump is sending that he needs attention, whatever that attention for, whether it's improved balance of trade, whatever it is for. But while we do that, while we also improve our standing with Russia, with the US, watching our backs, I think it's also important for us not to neglect deeper, more meaningful intra-African engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, members of the audience, you have been very patient. We are very grateful. You can now ask your questions. We won't be able to take all of them. And the way I'm going to do it, I will allow the members of the panel to rest. So they will just be writing down your questions. And then they will just, whoever is interested will now answer. So Sulaiman Adegoke Lawal. Sulaiman Adegoke Lawal, you have to, we don't take anonymous. Those of you on Facebook and YouTube, we don't take questions from you. You have to tell us your affiliation, no anonymous person, please. It's just for protection. Please. Sulaiman, okay. You've changed your mind. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Please.
I'm there, please.
Please ask your question. Want to see. Yes, please go ahead, sir. Bye-bye. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. First, thanks for this very important discussion. I wanted to, I agree with a number of things, but I disagree with Azu in amongst other things, zeroing in on the seeming goodness we have with Republicans. I think it's much more complicated than that, and rather the fact that some Republicans have, as presidents, have made it speaks more to the zeitgeist of the spirit of the time, and this itself also relates to what we are talking about with regards to why did you have the rise of Salafi jihadism in the nature you have had it in Nigeria. I did an article some years back at the height of the Boko Haram for the Socialism and Democracy journal, and which I drew from Yusuf Bala Usman about the game of mask, because this is at the heart of why we are where we are, how the ruling class uses religion, the mobilization of ethnic and religious identities, and the role this play in what we are. But even more than that, I think it is crucial for us not to fall into the pitfall of that. Well, Trump, even what he's saying is wrong. We should categorically stand against Trump's because it's not just about Trump. Jeffrey Sachs tried to argue that it is part of the new American post-Cold War politics, weaponizing humanitarianism. But it goes even beyond that. This is exactly what we have been facing from the West, from the period of the so-called white man's burden. We should not forget that the annexation of Lagos started with claims of stopping slave trade. So there's a long history of this, and there are two different, we should be very, very categorical about that. And the issue of figures, I think, I'm quite shocked that it took BBC to question Inter-Society. Emeka Agbalasi is someone we have known for quite a while, since the June 12 days. He's a fighter. I mean, in the June 12 days he was, but he had always been known to exaggerate a lot. And I did point this out in an article, to exaggerate a lot. And look at his board. None of them has the expertise to give the figures. Himself, his friend Anayo, and his wife, who's claims that yes, she's an evangelical activist, and that is all. We should query these questions. We should query the American position, not just because we are having genocide in Gaza and they are not calling that genocide, but 3% of Christians in Gaza have been killed. 3%, now you're talking of genocide. So figures might not be everything, but they do matter. And lastly, and I'll stop here. I think that the question of the way forward now, going forward, is that we should look, it's not just there's a religious dimension to this, but without addressing, seeing the whole issue in its totality and addressing it, the socio-economic aspect of it, the ecological aspect of it, reducing it to the religious, we would be playing into the hands of those that want to sharpen those divide and weaponize it in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Abdurasak Umar Farouk. Comrade Abdurasak. Please allow him.
Hello, Prof, and all the participants.
Go ahead. It's a different person that you are showing, not the comrade. Okay, Dr. Bola Dauda, you go ahead.
Thank you very much. I want to readdress the gathering to why we are here. It's about Trump and Nigeria. We have shifted to a situation in which we are digressing from the role of the West, the role of America. Briefly, you will remember what America did between, I will go back a little in history, between Iraq and Iran. They gave the two countries equal weapons that for 12 years, there was no winner, no loser. And then they got to Libya and got rid of Gaddafi. They went to Iraq and got rid of Saddam Hussein. Why they were supporting Saudi Arabia? They went into Afghanistan. Trump is interested in Nigerian oil. Trump is interested in the Nigerian economy. And the greatest shock the West and America got is Dangote's refinery. With that Dangote refinery, the ball game of our relationship with the West has changed. There is no way diplomacy can persuade Trump or America go back into wherever there has been any country any developing country that has been disorganized. America's hand was there. In the days of apartheid, ANC was regarded as a terrorist. And at the end of the day, when they lost, the point is that we were lucky that this time around, it's not Buhari, it's not a Muslim in the real sense of the Muslim fundamentalist that is the president of Nigeria. Tinubu's wife is a pastor of Redeem. So there's no way you can say that the president of Nigeria is sponsoring the state against the Christians.
Thank you.
Basically, I want us to take note of the resource politics. They are only interested in our oil, nothing more.
Thank you. You can't talk about Trump, international politics without domestic issues. Professor Babafemi Badejo, former diplomat. Professor, yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm very, very appreciative of your starting this interview. It has been very, very, very wonderful. I've learned a lot from everybody. Of course, I am more excited about Madame Olufunke Baruwa, who seemed to have done extraordinarily well in putting across these issues. And I want to also appreciate you, not only for putting this together, but for diligently handling the problem that arose.
Your comment. Don't praise us.
No, it's not. It's important. It's important because a scholar does not say to another, you are talking nonsense, but you are able to manage it very well, and I thank you for that.
Can you bring this, hold on, can you bring, you just recently went to Somalia, I think. Is it Somalia or Sudan?
Djibouti.
Djibouti. Can you bring your Djibouti experience to this conversation?
Okay, I want to say that there has been the talk about our having being a secular state. We are not a secular state by the definition of that term, because some people decided that it won't be. And we need to always revisit that, because policy, whether at the central or at the state level, should not be on the basis of anything religious. But in any case, that is that. You asked the question about, Azu spoke about sovereignty. I want to say to Azu and Olorunfemi that the world is transactional, but the reality is the deception that was the case before we had Trump, who started trying to take away the veil from the deceit that we have been subjected to, that no, it's not transactional. There are several high goals, human freedom, democracy, all that he has pushed aside. But on sovereignty, yes, we do have sovereignty per the statute of the United Nations, but it doesn't operate that way, because even under that, we also, under international law, signed away this in the responsibility to protect. So then the issue of, should we break up? I think we should try, before thinking about whether to break up or anything else, we should try the question of whether we can have a confederation in which people are able to look at several factors and set about it in their own ways. You destabilized me a bit in wanting to talk about Somalia and Djibouti. But the fact of why I was in Djibouti was because of the problem in Somalia. The problem in Somalia is one in which the state totally went into coma. And then the efforts to try to repackage that state. And it seems that we are not paying attention to that possibility for Nigeria, but it is a possible one. And to repackage it together since 1991, when Siad Barre fled the city, has not been an easy task. And yes, Djibouti 25 years ago got involved in trying to solve this problem. That was what took me back to Djibouti, because I was involved in the repackaging, and the Djiboutian authorities were appreciative of the role I played 25 years ago in that respect. Now, I'm going to stop because I see that you are agitated. You want to stop me. I will stop. And but I've learned a lot from all the people. Thanks a lot.
Professor Christopher Isike, University of Pretoria. Professor Isike, University of Pretoria. Go ahead.
Mute. Right. Yes. So I just want to make a few, maybe one or two clarifications, and then ask Dr. Bukarti a question. So I will start with saying that truth is an epistemological goal. And that is the idea that truth is the ultimate goal of research. And this is rooted in both Western, Eastern, and even African epistemologies. And that continues to shape, scientific, humanistic traditions, as well as social behavior. So I would think that it will be good for us to tell each other some truths, even though there can be many, truths, right? So I will just give, 3 or 4 truths and then ask my question. So the first one I want to tell is that the United States is not responsible for state and governance failures in Nigeria. We are responsible for that. Then relatedly, and this speaks to the part of the governance failures we have. Nigeria does not have a Nigeria-US strategy or policy. And we do not even have any policy or strategy towards any great powers. And that's also our problem, not theirs. That's one. Two, religion, region, and ethnicity are the major determinants of Nigeria's politics. These factors determine everything that we do. Politics is about interest, and our interests around our understanding of politics are woven around these three factors. Three, we make a very serious mistake when we reduce what Trump said, about the killings of Christians in Nigeria to Boko Haram, which is a phenomenon that is less than 15 years ago. The targeted killings of Christians, which is a genocide, killings of Christians in the north of Nigeria has been happening since the 1980s. I am from the south, but I grew up in the north, okay? And Hausa is the only Nigerian language that I speak. And I can tell you that in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up in the north, the records are there that Muslims frequently rise from the mosque on a Friday and indiscriminately go about killing Christians as a group, and this was without consequence. Okay, as a group, the records are there in the 80s and in the 90s. Three, in a plural society like Nigeria, of course, there are bound to be tensions between different groups, okay? But the problem in Nigeria on this specific issue of religious killings is the failure of any government to prosecute any Muslim or Muslim groups that have willy-nilly murdered Christians in the north. And this leads me to my question for Dr. Bukarti. Muslims, like I said before, okay, I've not said this. Muslims are not willy-nilly killed in Nigeria by Christians. But Christians are killed willy-nilly in Nigeria, not just by terrorists, but by ordinary citizens, market women, clerics, youth, university students who decide what blasphemy is and have the audacity to also implement judgment on Christians who have committed this blasphemy. So the question is this. In the 65 years of Nigeria's history, Dr. Bukarti, can you tell me one instance, just one, where Christians mobbed and killed one Muslim in the South because of a religious crime he or she committed? I just want you to be able to tell me that.
Thank you. He will answer much later. Moses Ochonu. Moses Ochonu. Professor Moses, please ask your question or your comment. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I have learned a lot from the conversation. I actually felt a little bit bad because of to see the exchange between Dr. Majid Dahiru and my brother, Dr. Bukarti, go south, because I was learning. I know we need to have these difficult conversations. There's nothing wrong with talking about tough things, tough issues where emotions are involved. So I want to direct a question to Dr. Bukarti, actually, because I think that maybe the way that Majid framed his comment and question was a bit provocative, but it shouldn't distract us. That shouldn't distract us from the point that he was trying to make, which is that there might actually be a problem of extremism, Muslim extremism in the north, a problem that has fed into some of the violence, maybe not in central Nigeria, but in the northeast with Boko Haram and now Lakurawa and other groups who have definite Islamist ideology. So if my question, because there's a very good book by Dr. Mahmoud Saka, where he compares the influence of, for instance, Wahhabism in Senegal and Nigeria, and looked at how these ideologies, this Salafism came to Senegal and Nigeria. And his conclusion in that book is that they failed in Senegal. They failed, but they succeeded in Nigeria in planting that seed, and that in Nigeria it germinated and flourished, and Wahhabism became Salafism, and Salafism ultimately became jihadi Salafism. And so the question we need to return to, why did it fail in Senegal? Why did it succeed in Nigeria? And I think when we look critically at that question, we need to look at a history of radicalization, a history of what I call popular extremism.
So, Moses, how will you respond to the comment from the South that the North is bringing them down and bringing them back?
I respond by saying that that is political discourse. I understand where it's coming from. I don't align myself with it because, it's all subjective. But
Okay.
I want to return to the question I want to pose to Bukarti, because if you look at what I'm driving at, it is the fact that, you have a place, Nigeria seems to be a fertile ground for the growth and the flourishing of certain ideologies. I don't know why. I want to understand it. Senegal, they didn't succeed in Senegal, but they succeeded in Nigeria. And there's a whole long history. There are books written about it, about how this happened. So this process of radicalization, the receptiveness to extremism, extremist doctrines, not just in terms of theology, but also in terms of popular consciousness. People have referred to the beheadings for blasphemy. I attended Bayero University, Kano. Let me give a personal story. For the 4 years that I was there, or 5 years that I was there, and I lived in Kano extensively beyond my university education, we were not allowed to build a church on the campus. They just wouldn't allow it because there was a popular sentiment against it. I don't know why. It's a federal university. We were meeting in classrooms. Even the permission to use a classroom on campus was later on withdrawn. There were times when worshippers were attacked. So there is what I call a popular sympathy for extremism, religious extremism that exists. It's a problem in the North. The failure of state governments to issue licenses or permission for Christians to build churches, to buy land to build churches, it's across the Northwest. So there's popular extremism, and then there's the more narrow theological extremism.
Thank you.
The question is, Dr. Bukarti, do we have a problem of extremism in the North, and is it related to some of the violence that is happening in that region? Thank you.
Thank you. You are reframing Dahiru's question. Ibrahim Muhammad. Ibrahim, are you there? While waiting for him, Nasifi Abdullahi.
Sorry, I'm here.
Okay, please go ahead.
So my question is actually
Please show his face, please. Yes, go ahead, Ibrahim.
My question is direct to normally I've had many people from southern Nigeria talk about things that are happening in northern Nigeria. Despite that, we have a language barrier. In northern Nigeria, majority people speak Hausa, and many things happen, and then people interpret it differently. And also people put their tribalism, sometimes even something more than that. I'm sorry to put it that way, but then it's reality, really. You see, you ask every northerner exactly what happened, and then he tell you exactly, because he knows the situation better than you, because we understand the language, we understand the people. Please, I ask people to come clean. Whenever they want to know things, they want to learn and learn, let northerners speak first. Let them, express themselves, how the situation are. Then you can understand better. And then also, please try to come clean.
Can you give
without any?
Can you give examples of what you are talking about?
Regarding to Deborah case and issue about a riot in northern Nigeria, and somebody even mentioned, I can't remember exactly the name. Somebody mentioned that many times people, they just riot and kill people like Christian in northern Nigeria. I've never had that. I am a northerner, and he can't tell me northern Nigeria more than I can tell him about northern Nigeria, because I am from that particular angle. So please, I urge people, whenever they want to talk about northern Nigeria, let northerners speak first, and then maybe they can understand something better. And then please come with an open mind, not from angle of emotion or anything.
Thank you, Ibrahim.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're very grateful. Nasifi Abdullahi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Where are you calling from? Where are you calling from?
I'm currently a master's student in UK. I am originally from Katsina, but I was born and still living in Jos, Plateau State. Actually, the only thing I wanted to chip in is that the issue that Prof. Christopher said about killings of Muslims willingly, it do happens actually. I was born and grew up, I'm still living in Plateau State, Jos. It happens even in 2011. I was just 12 years old then. We were attacked. I almost got killed. Personally, a friend of mine was killed on Saladi. We were attacked by Christians. So what he's saying that I don't agree with that actually. I don't agree with that. The fact are the issues before Boko Haram and other things mostly could be traced back to issues of farmers, headers, clashes, and others. So I don't agree with him saying that no killings of Muslims willingly. And okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sani, Amidu Sani. Amidu Sani is the chief imam of Lagos State University, LASU. Professor Sani, I'm former Vice Chancellor of Fountain University. Yes.
I'm happy to be joining you from outside Nigeria, and I'm quite impressed with the conversation so far. But I think we have to be very careful, especially academics, in trying to not to sort of hit up the politics. Well, the exchange between Dr. Bukarti and Dr. Dahiru, I think it was unnecessary. And I think we should be very, very careful about that. Well, the fact is that we should stop religious or ethnic profiling. Are Nigerians being killed, whether Muslims or Christian or enemies or other religion? That is the truth, yes. Then the statistics, I think every life is very, very important. We should not be talking in terms of the number of Muslims being more or Christians being more. And I think this is a systemic failure all along. The government has not addressed the issue frontally since all these issues began. And that is very, very important. Now, I think what we need to do is for the government to be more serious in terms of having a good machinery of information machinery, engagement with public, engagement with the international community in place. Nigerians need to know the fact of the case. And I think what Professor Christopher Isike said, that people just leave the mosque and just go out and kick, I think it's a bit on the, it's not true. I mean, academics have a more responsibility to be factual in their narrations, and I think it's very, very important.
But he said he observed it. What
well,
fact?
I wouldn't know which area of the north he observed, but I think we need some data and fact to prove that. And I think Dr. Bulama, as an academic, has actually prove his fact with facts and figures. But of course, we know the media in Nigeria is more or less has some sort of stereotypes that more often than not are against the Islamic community. But I think that's neither here nor there. And I think we should try as much as possible to look for solutions now, not about whether it's a Muslim in majority being the victim or Christian, but certainly there's certainly no Christian genocide in Nigeria. It's a very false narrative. It is it's a political gimmick, yes, and we should be very careful and to address it properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're very grateful. Temitope Fagua, we won't be able to take all of you, but we'll try. If the comments are short, we'll try. Yes, please. Please unmute him.
Yes, I would just quickly like to say that I think it is Kwame Nkrumah that told us, and I think why we need to mention Kwame Nkrumah is again to express the importance of Pan-Africanism as a radical ideology, not one that is very pedestrian as being hijacked by members of the ruling class today. Kwame Nkrumah in Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, told us that, well, the final most dangerous aspect of imperialism will come when African states, neo-colonial states understand themselves, their existence as a cannibalistic form of relationship, so that our approach to our neo-colonial problems is being, it's been approached from the point of view of identities, neo-colonial identities one more time. I think that ultimately it is important for us to begin to define, our identity within the ambit of its neo-colonial state. Because the back and forth around Christianity, around Islam, around religion, also, exposes, the fact that so much contradictions, engulfs our reality today in the 21st century as members of the international, system. We fighting each other over Abrahamic religions. And I'm speaking as a Pan-Africanist, which is very, very important because we see, the antecedents of these, contradictions. And for some of us, we hope that there will come a point in time, in our history as African people, as global African people, where we wouldn't have to engage in this, counterproductive debate over identities that were, in fact, forced down into our throats as a people. And I think that we must also begin to draw inspiration, from the African diaspora. Because when you examine the realities and conditions of our people in places like Brazil, for instance, you examine the Afro-Brazilian community. What did they do with these, identities? What did they do with their contact with Christianity? What did they do with their contact with Islam? What did they do with all of these identities? They negotiated with these identities, but they never for once, threw their African identities into the trash can of history. They use the African identity as the basis of negotiation. They place the African identity over and above, any of these identities. So the point I'm making is that, the back and forth that we continuously have about these religions, seems to, take us away totally from the importance of our African identity. And when we use our African identity as a negotiating force, we would see that there is more than unite us than all of this.
Thank you. Yusuf Wara Abubakar. If I mispronounce your name, I apologize. I also mispronounce the name of one of the panelists. Yusuf Wara, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor, for organizing this insight.
Can you show the video, please? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm calling from Turkey.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this program. I just want to make my own few contribution as a foreign policy analyst. Definitely, when Trump said that there's genocide in Nigeria and he's willing to do something about it, every foreign policy analyst knows that no, there's something behind it. The United States cannot use its resources, risk its military personnel just to go and protect some group, whether Christian or otherwise in other country. We know that there are some policies behind that which we must all sit down and analyze. And a lot of people reach out to me, those who know that I'm from Nigeria, from different countries, trying to ask me about the issue. I told them that, okay, we have to look at this issue in two perspectives. One, as Professor made mention earlier, we have to look at Trump internal politics, and then we have to look at general American foreign policy. First of all, we know that Trump won elections with the majority of...
Please be brief, please be brief. Please.
Okay, Trump domestic policy, he won election. He had a lot of support from the Christian in the United States. And of course, we know that with the current domestic policy in the United States, it's like Trump support is a kind of drop, and he need to get, and the only thing he can
do... Please be brief. We have 10 more people. Be brief, please.
Okay. Let me just say...
what's your question?
So, no, I don't have any question for now. What I just want us to do is to look at it in a broader perspective and then analyze the situation that what we need to do as Nigerians all together to overcome these situations. Our leaders have to sit down and address our domestic problem. And that's we, the analysts, that's what we have to do. That's what we have to be talking about. We know that all these religious crises are used as just an instrument to divide us and manipulate us.
Who are these people dividing you?
So, yes, you ask a very good questions, Professor. We know when we look at the international politics from colonization to date, we have divide and rule. This is a major concept, and nobody can dispute the concept.
So you think somebody went to Dr. Dahiru and Bukarti and said, "I want to divide you"?
No, in international politics, nobody will come and tell you that. But when you look at the body language, the approach of people, when they want to get something out of you, they will not come to you and say, "Oh, come and give me your oil, I want to take it." They will come with a policy that will compel you to agree to their wills and practices.
Evelyn Ube. If it is Ube.
Thank you, Prof. I was just going to say you've called like 6 men now.
Now it's only one man, it's only one woman.
No, there is Caroline, there's Evelyn, there's Abimbola, there's Nneka, there's
No, Abimbola just.
I'm protesting.
Yeah, no, it's fine, because I was looking for woman's name.
Thank you.
The only one I saw is Evelyn. You are telling us those who are on the program, but they didn't say they want to ask questions. Because I have a list here, and there's only Evelyn. There's no Caroline who wants to ask questions. Okay, Evelyn, thanks for the fight.
Thank you, and thank you, Prof, for creating this platform. I've been listening keenly to the discussion.
Where are you calling from?
Oh, sorry, my name is Evelyn Ube. I'm the Executive Director of Race Center, and I'm calling from Nigeria. Currently, I'm in Benue State. Okay. So I'm particularly interested in the issues raised by Mrs. Funke Baruwa as to the trade negotiations. Very importantly, race is working in communities where natural resources are being exploited by Chinese companies, and these communities are militarized. While we understand aid in the long term would not bring development to Nigeria, but the USAID funds, stood in the gap in terms of developmental outcomes. So my question is, how do we maximize trade negotiations in a way, knowing that these negotiations, particularly with Chinese, are not transparent? We, the people, civic organizations, do not understand what is happening. One mining company moves into a community and work starts. Before you know it, communities, warring factions begin to fight, people are displaced, communities are deserted, but work is still going on. So how do we maximize trade negotiations in a way that benefits communities, in a way that is transparent? In terms of next steps, what can civil society organizations do?
You are calling from Benue. Why do some people there think that they are not citizens? They are not treated as citizens?
Because, of course, typically Nigerians expect the dividends of democracy that has been promised. Protection of lives and properties, access to basic things like pipe-borne water, good roads, and all of those development outcomes, quality and free education. People feel left out because they are not accessing these basic promises and tenets of democracy. They feel left out. They are not consulted.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I'll be able to take everybody, but I'm trying. If people keep their comments short, we'll take Olawale Ismail, Olawale. Olawale. Why waiting for him? Lawan, Lawan. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you for these wonderful contributions.
Where are you calling from?
My name is Mohammed Lau Musa. I'm coming from Boston. I'm a medical doctor and I'm a research fellow here in Harvard. I focus on CBRNE on global context. So to go direct to the point, thank you for this webmail. I would like to draw the attention of our youths and all that the participants that are asking questions that they should direct their questions to Bulama Bukarti simply because he is an expert, he is a PhD holder, he is expert in that domain. He can give them clarity, he can give them knowledge to gain rather than racial or religiously profiling him. So in that context, we can know more. So, I'm from Bama in Borno and Yobe as well. So I know the issues of Boko Haram and much of it. So most of our colleagues, maybe from South, they may not know, but having the opportunity to meet Bulama Bukarti or myself or someone or my sister here from Benue, we can know more. You can ask them clarity, you can use data, but you can not just send your questions based because someone is Muslim or Christian or otherwise, please. And thank you. We are looking forward to make Nigeria greater again. Thank you.
Aminu Adamu Naganye, excuse me if I mispronounce your name, forgive me. Aminu Adam.
Thank you, Prof. I think you really tried to pronounce the name correctly. I am calling from Kano, Nigeria. And I have two questions. One is directed to Bulama Bukarti, who happened to be my senior in BUK. So my question is, how can we differentiate, for example, mob killing that is attached to religion whenever a Muslim or group of Muslims actually carried out that despicable attack? How can we differentiate mob killing, for example, and the kind of discussion around Sharia? Because some discussants, especially in Nigeria and even outside, they tend to associate even mob killing to Sharia. So how can we clearly make a demarcation between the two? That is one. And then secondly, I think I would direct it to anybody that is interested in the panel to talk about how do we situate, the nuances of this conflict that are going on in Nigeria, because I listen to a lot of people trying to reduce it to a binary discourse, like we and them, Muslim and Christians, for example, while the conflict in its nuances are resources at some point, ethno-religious at some point, and then of course the issue of gold mining, the issue of climate change and other things. So how can we, ensure that the right information actually, is always, discussed so that we work towards finding solution instead of navigating in one place without actually going anywhere? Thank you.
Aminu. Amina, you didn't indicate your last name. Amina.
Yeah, Amina Salau.
Please, let's see you. Where are you calling from?
I'm from Nigeria, but I'm in Britain at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say, talk about when the other, I think it's a panel or one of the participants talked about Christian genocide mainly, but it is not. I believe it is both sides, if not more Muslims being killed. I remember in 1990, when I was going to school, I didn't know there was war in Kaduna. I was in Kaduna and I was going to call on my friend who lives among Zangun Kataf people. Zangun Kataf people are mainly Christians. Yeah, if not all Christians. I had my hijab and I was going, and she was shouting from afar, Amina, remove your hijab, remove your hijab. I almost got killed because they were killing Muslims. I witnessed that, so I will say that. I'm not saying from both sides is right, but we have a problem in Nigeria. We don't speak the truth about how things are going on. I remember what my husband always said, that not until we remove religion from, from everything we do before Nigeria can be better, before there can be progress. But what he meant is not that we should all stop being Muslims or stop being Christians, but we should speak the truth about things. In Igbo land, they were being nobody is allowed to make to buy land or to build mosques. So in Kano, like the person was saying when he was in BUK, they didn't allow. So, if we can all live above our religion, because our prophet, sallam, our Islamic prophet told us to be good to our neighbors. And our neighbors can be Christian, can be pagan, can be anything. So we should all try to live up to the teachings. This is all I wanted to say. Thank you, sir.
I want to ask the members of the panel whether they can take more questions. If they say no, I will seek their response. If they say yes, because we still have many people who want to ask questions, and I have to be extremely polite to members of the audience. Do you have energy to take more questions?
Prof, I think we have about 14 or 15 questions, if not more than that already.
Well, you can tell me the number
so
you want.
My suggestion. Yeah, so I think in answering some of the questions that have been asked, I think we may answer others that are anticipated. So my suggestion at this point would be that we pause and take these questions. If by the time we finish answering them, we have not assuaged the concerns of those who still have their hands raised up, then we can go another round. Yes, that's
Should
what
we
I
take that as a consensus? Okay, don't answer all the questions. Only answer those you think are important, maybe two that you consider important. Let's start with Ms. Baruwa. And you may also pass if you don't want to answer.
Thank you. I might, but just to say that if there's anything that has sort of proven that some of these insecurity issues are religiously motivated, it is the fact that one group denies the other group's pain. And one group says they also have that pain. That just clearly tells me that it is a religious issue. We can cloud it and say it. Of course, it started maybe from land, from resource control, and other ethno-religious issues. But it is very clear that, as my sister who just finished said, that unless we take out these religious connotations, we're going to continue having these challenges over and over again. I lost count of a lot of the questions because I felt some of them were comments, not questions, like Mr. Azu said, and a lot of them were also just re-emphasizing some of the things we had earlier established. But we spent a lot of the questions were around, give me examples of Christians killed or people giving experiences of themselves almost being lynched as Muslims or as Christians. And we have enough death to go around, permit my using that word, if we actually ask everybody. And so that last speaker's word about what her husband advised about if we can remove the religious sentiment that we attach to everything. Every life matters. It really doesn't matter who they are. I actually feel more pain, not for Christians and for Muslims. I think we are even the majority. The people that I feel more pain for are the Nigerians who do not belong to either of these religions. Nobody's even talking about them. They don't even exist. So if anybody should even be talking about maybe religious intolerance, it should be those who don't belong to it, because many people actually pretend to be Muslims or Christians, and that's the truth. I've lived with a lot of Muslims and Christians to know they only do that because if they don't, they will either be killed or mobbed, like somebody said, or they will not get anything in the country because you must either be Christian or Muslim. But many Nigerians are actually not Christian or Muslim, because if we are, we will not have all the insecurity and all the challenges that we have today. Over.
Thank you. On December 7, we are bringing President Olusegun Obasanjo, and some of these questions you may also ask him. Olorunfemi, you don't have to respond. If you want to respond, please respond.
Thank you. It's not allowing me to. Okay, yes. Okay, Prof. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I've tried my best to try and take us to to stay away from the religious issue, but maybe I should just quickly address this. So some of the demands I've seen them make, and when I say them, I mean the people pushing the narrative of Christian genocide and all of that, they've been very specific. They've talked about the Sharia law, the Sharia practice in some states in the north. I don't know if you want to address this since Dr. Bukarti is here. What do you think? Should we be looking at a way, because there's a specific demand, should we be looking at a way of excising the Sharia from the constitution, or have a way, or have something in place in such a way that there's a rollback on what has already been put in place in some of the states?
Is it not a state right? Is it not a state right?
If it
Sharia
is,
not the right of the state?
Constitutionally it is, but there are demands. People have seen that it's been misused to cause some havoc in that. So maybe we can have a conversation around that, particularly with the blasphemy law as it is. So those are two things. But beyond that, I will take us back to my earlier point that this is just a small screen, something much bigger, that we should look at all of the dimensions. We are talking about the role of China, the role of Russia. In fact, as at this point in time, China is the leading supplier of arms to Nigeria. Economic relations between us and America is not as it is. So we should really consider all of these things, because it would appear that President Trump is trying to get our attention. And then don't forget that our foreign policy at the moment has been structured around what the foreign affairs minister has called the doctrine of strategic autonomy, which means we are free to relate to as many countries as possible, which is how it should be. So we have a robust relationship with China, Russia, and all of that. It seems that has unsettled, particularly in the area of minerals and all of that, and mineral resources. The Chinese already have a head start, and I'm not sure America is happy about that. So we need to, even with the Gulf of Guinea, there are other, China, Russia, India, all of them, they're already, America, I'm not sure they are comfortable with how things are. So we need to place this on the table and be able to assess President Trump through the back channels to be able to have an arrangement and an agreement that would sort of appease him, so that we can come back home and resolve all of these issues with insecurity. I don't believe it's the primary thing on the table.
Dr. Dahiru.
Okay, well, I'm not going to answer any question because no one's directed to me, but I'll make a clarification just so we don't lose track of certain issues. A number of comments from some of our brothers from the North, particularly the young man from the United States who says he studied at Harvard, tend to think that I am either a Muslim or a Northerner. And you see, these are the kind of assumptions that somehow betrays some level of sentiments that are useful in this conversation. I'm not just a Muslim, I'm a Northerner. And it might interest you to know that the second arm of ISWAP is in my hometown of Okene in Kogi State. Prof, it might interest you to know that the people who went to church and to kill people in the Catholic Church came from my community. They're my brothers and sisters. It might interest you to know that recently, they escaped from Kuje preaching had just been arrested He was the one who led the attack on Deeper Life Church in my community in 2013. Of the two leaders of the Lakura movement that have been arrested, one is from my village in Okene. So when I speak of extremism, I'm speaking my lived reality. You can't question it. That you are from Bama or you are from Yobe does not confer on you the legitimacy alone to speak on this issue, because I come from a community that has experienced violent extremism. In that my community, the leading Pentecostal bishop in my community was killed in 2011 in his residence by this same group. This same group led an attack on all traditionalists in my community. Anybody that fits into their death list based on ideology, based on their radical ideology, we are almost always exterminated. Until the community rose to say, this is the virus within us. And thankfully, we had a political leadership that quickly acknowledged that our sons and daughters have, in the name of religion, and then they put in place measures to tackle it. We are still trying to contain it. It's still not easy. But I can tell you that growing up, I saw how these young men and women lost track based on preachings, not in secret, not behind the scene, in open places, in mosques, open preaching against Christians, against the idea of a Western-style democracy, against everything they consider as Western, which can be summed up as Boko Haram. I'm speaking from my reality. I have been to the camp in Gombe where ex-combatants in the battlefield have been rehabilitated. I was there on a guided tour in Manam City, local government. And when I asked everybody that has been declared, they radicalized so far and are now waiting for rehabilitation and integration, I asked them one question: what motivated you to pick up arms against the state and start killing people? They said, Aiki Allah, the work of God. And I asked them, but why are you killing fellow Muslims? They said, those ones are considered not Muslims. They were told that those of us that are in the town, we are not Muslims. It's understood. So for you to think that it is only you up there that understand these things, it means you have limited knowledge of the matter, so the matter not discussed. And I'll urge that next time, please, Prof, in assembling both your audit and your panelists, please sift through so that we don't come here and begin to have arguments and fights when we should be having constructive engagement on how to achieve the way forward. I had said it at the beginning of my statement that Boko Haram and all such other groups are not Islamic. They are only Muslim in nature. That is, they are party they found of Islam, that I as a Muslim do not consider as Islamic. But that is my own thinking. To them, they are the ones that are even the Muslim, while I'm not a good Muslim. And as Muslims, let me end on this. As Muslims, in a country that is bedeviled by the twin problems of banditry, killer herdsmen, and Boko Haram, that are Muslim in outlook, we must show empathy to other people that are affected as much as we show empathy to ourselves, so that we can have national healing and reconciliation towards come together to contain it. It is very unhelpful when Muslims habitually appear defensive when they talk about Christian killings or Christian genocide, appear defensive and begin to question the rationale. It is unhelpful because you can't have healing, you can't have reconciliation. The other party will not feel that, okay, at least you empathize that those that are killing both of us come from your own side, so let us join hands together to find a solution. That is what I am doing, because I know that Donald Trump ultimately will come to Nigeria to save us. We have to save ourselves. And to save ourselves, we must have national unity first, across faith, across religious lines, to be to now have a way forward on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My boss, Asu.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. I would like to just respond to a few of the questions. And then first off, let me correct, if I may, most respectfully, a point that had been made by, I think, Dr. Dauda, I think, who said, who of course said that in his comments regarding the motive for President Trump's statement, of course, said that Nigeria's the Dangote refinery that it has to do with the oil. But I just the point I just wanted to raise in responding to that is to say that the US is the largest oil producer today, and that is a matter of fact. It doesn't deny that there might be resource, the appetite for resource or for some transaction or business underscores or may underscore the reason why President Trump has, is responding the way he has responded. But it's just important to point out that fact that regarding oil and the size of oil, that US currently, and I speak to the fact, is the largest producer of oil in the world. Now, having said that, I'd also then like to very quickly respond to some of the points that were made by many of the contributors. And I'd like to thank them very well for their very passionate contribution to this conversation that we are having. Now, there are clearly structural problems. And again, you remember you asked me the question about what I thought about Nigeria, about whether Nigeria should pack up and then just divide quietly or peacefully or not. Clearly, Nigeria is also a union in progress. It's an unfinished work, clearly. There are major structural issues that we have to deal with that are manifesting itself in the different forms in which we are seeing them, including, of course, very unfortunately, this targeted killing that we're discussing, which has now been described by President Trump as a genocide and as a basis for him to come guns a-blazing to save Christians from Nigeria. And I would just point to some of the structural issues, which are non-religious in nature. Clearly, what I hear clearly and what I believe very, very fervently is that in the states and in a number of the states in the north, there are structural impediments to free practice of religion. That I don't think is something we can come and deny. We can't deny the non-existence of that. But similarly also, how do you describe a situation, and I'm speaking more generally in Nigeria, where a woman, in spite of whatever the law says, a woman is not recognized if you go to the police station. Whatever the law says, a woman cannot take into custody bail. That is clearly is a structural problem. Or in some parts of the country, especially in the southeast, where a woman cannot buy land, or it's believed that she does not have any, she doesn't have a say. Not in every part, but she doesn't have a say. So these are not things that are legislated, but these are structural, systemic issues that with also in the recent conversation that unfortunately has flared up in Lagos about people from the southeast not being able to. So these are issues that we need to deal with. They are structural. Unfortunately, in some parts of the country, they manifest, as they regrettably have manifested, in the form of religious contestations. My mind goes back to Akaluka and what happened after the horrible beheading of Akaluka, for example. But there are structural problems that either, which going forward, which is actually if we get the point to just summarize, which is an area of interest for me. How do we deal with some of these structural problems in the states in the north, and which also manifest in other forms in other parts of the country, where people are not able to seek and access justice when they feel injured? That, I think, is a fundamental problem which we need to address. Thank you.
So is that a failure of democracy?
I do not think that it's a failure of democracy, but clearly there are, where you live in a country where people feel that if they are injured, they can have redress and they have confidence in the system to provide relief, then the resort to violence is abated. But unfortunately, as we have it in this, and that does not justify violence of any group against the other. I think that the government also, in terms of moving forward and addressing the problem, has to deal with this issue, not only at the federal level, but also at the state and local government levels, where people who feel injured or where the people must know that there are consequences for what they do wrong. It is also the lack of consequences that has, unfortunately escalated in the different forms of reprisal attacks and all kinds of things, because people are then forced to take the law into their own hands because they believe that the legal system will not give them the justice that they deserve.
Thank you. So many questions, my good friend Bulama.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, quite a few questions, and Dr. Simbo made my job even harder by adding another one. I just want to thank everyone, Prof. People made very insightful comments. Professor Sani in particular, very happy to see you here, and thank you for your comments. Christopher Isike, Professor Christopher Isike from Pretoria University, I think made a very important point around the goal of research, ultimate goal being search for truth. Prof, he has put me in a very difficult position. I have never done this, and I hate to frame a narrative of us versus them. I have never seen Nigerians as Muslims or Christians, Southerners or Northerners. I try to see Nigerians as human beings who all have right to live with dignity and to prosper in their communities. But he asked me to give him one example of a Muslim being killed in Nigeria, being mob lynched in Nigeria. I will give him 3, Professor, and I will tell you that there are very, very many. Professor Isike himself, Professor, said he grew up in northern Nigeria, where he said every Friday Muslims pick up arms and just go out from the mosque to kill Christians. He should have gone further to tell us how he survived. Antifunke grew up in northern Nigeria. I mean, why are we doing this to Nigeria? Why are we doing this to Nigeria? How could it be that in the 21st century, Muslims every Friday go out to the mosque, out of the mosque to attack Christians and kill them just anyhow? Please. And this is a professor from a university talking this and saying, I grew up in the north. Professor General Al-Kali, please read out his story. General Idris Al-Kali, Muhammad Idris Al-Kali. He was a retired general of the Nigerian army, I think 3-star general. He left his home Abuja to his hometown Gombe state. He was stopped in Jos. He was killed by youth in Jos for being a Muslim traveler, and his body was put in the well, and his car and phones were taken away. It took about 2 years, and in the end, the culprits were arrested, and they led the Nigerian army to where they put his body inside a dead well. His case is still ongoing in Jos, and that happened in September 2018. In May 2022, Harira Jibril, a pregnant woman with her 4 children, I can give you all the names and you can search online, was stopped in Anambra traveling, and she was killed with all the children, including the fetus inside her womb. In August 2021, Sheikh Dahiru Bauchi's student went on Maulud celebration from southern Nigeria, where they lived. There are northerners who lived in the south. They went to Bauchi State. On their way back, they were stopped in Jos. 25 of them were killed, travelers, because they were Fulani, because they were Muslims. I didn't want to cite any of these examples, and there are very many of them. There were challenges in the 1980s in northern Nigeria, including violence, and Amina Salah was right when she mentioned Zongo and Kataf. There were crises in Kafanchang. Even 2-3 years ago, a Muslim traveler has to check when leaving Abuja for Kano that there are no people at Gonungora, people who claim to be Christian who stop travelers and they fish out Muslims and kill them. I don't believe Christianity preaches that, and I don't brush Christianity with that, and I don't blame Christians for that. There is a fringe of Muslim groups that are misinterpreting Islam, misapplying it, killing people in the name of religion. They are a very small minority, even in Dr. Majid's community. He is right that there is an issue with extremism in Kogi State. I know that very well because I have studied it very well, and I have lived with people from Kogi State, and I know that there are extremist elements in that community, but even him will not tell you the majority of Kogi Muslims are extremists. Of course, then that but Professor, my heart bleeds for citing examples and saying Muslims have been killed. I have never done this, and this is not me. I just wish people would read a bit more and will open their hearts to understand that denying the suffering of the Muslim community by saying it is mainly Christians that are affected is very, very offensive to the Muslims. It's incredibly offensive. Christians are being killed, they are being targeted, and it is wrong, and we must stop it. Muslims are being killed, they are being targeted, and it is wrong, and we must stop it. Now, the second person, Moses Ochono, Professor, I think, or Dr. Moses, raises a very important point, the question of extremism. Now, I have busied myself for the past 20 years with studying and countering violent extremism because it is easier to understand, it is easier to define, and it is more problematic. It is when one's extremist behavior leads to violence. But then when we talk about non-violent extremism, it's very difficult to define in the first place. Who gets to define who is an extremist? Is it when I disagree with your point of view of a particular social issue or religious issue that I have become an extremist, and therefore Northerners are extremists for wanting Sharia law, for example? Or is it who gets to define extremism and how? But if it is violent extremism, I am all for it. We need to define it. If your behavior leads to being aggressive against another person with a different behavior, then that becomes a problematic issue that we must tackle. He says Wahhabism or Salafism and Boko Haram and the example of Senegal. Interestingly, I was in Senegal twice doing research on religion in Senegal and some questions around extremism in Senegal. And of course, I have studied Nigeria for a long time. It's very easy for us to try to put Boko Haram's blame on a particular religious group, to say Salafis or Wahhabis or stuff like that. But I have written a paper, a report for the Tony Blair Institute like 5 years ago or so. It's called Violent Extremism in the Lake Chad Region, Lessons from Boko Haram. And my key argument was that if you looked at the 5 pillars of Boko Haram's ideology, you will find that they went to 5 different Muslim groups and took the most extremist element of each of the groups and put them together. That extremist element in the group itself will not lead to violence. But if you brought all of them together, then it becomes like a mousetrap that can lead to violence. For example, when we say Wahhabis or Salafis inspired Boko Haram's most important pillar from which they got their name is that Western secular education is forbidden for Muslims. The Izala group and the Salafis in northern Nigeria are the #1 advocates for Western education. They are the people sending their children to go and study in Western style schools to become medical doctors, engineers, lawyers, and all that. So how do we put this ideology that Boko Haram got from traditional northern Nigerian society of Western secular education being forbidden? And that had a history because Christianity came to northern Nigeria in form of Christian missionaries who came with British colonialists. And at the time, Islam had taken root for over 500 years in some parts of northern Nigeria. They saw Western colonialism as an evangelization mission because they came together with the missionaries, and therefore they rejected the Western style schools as evangelization schools. And that's why even today, there are a large population of northern Nigeria who did not go to school because they still conflate Western style schools with Western Christian evangelization. And Boko Haram took that from the traditional old thought, belief in northern Nigeria, which is not part of Izala or Salafi thought, for example. You have some pillars. One pillar of Boko Haram comes from the Islamic movement in Nigeria or the Shia movement, the question of Taghut and rejection of Nigeria's constitution. The question of violence, no Muslim group before Boko Haram was violent in that scale other than the Metasine. And so you could argue that they took that part from the Metasine group. And the Boko Haram founder's father himself was a member of the Metasine group. And so what I am saying is you cannot put the blame on one specific group, and those groups are mainly peaceful groups, but they have some extremist elements, and Boko Haram then takes that part of the group that is most extreme and makes it its ideology. And so I think it is dangerous for us to put the blame of Boko Haram on one specific group and say it came from the Wahhabis, for example, and therefore we use the Tariqa or the Sufis to counter them. It is much more complicated than that. Unfortunately, we are in a world that looks for simplistic answers where they are none. Now, Professor, should Sharia practice be removed from the constitution or blasphemy laws? Now, this conversation started with genocide, and then it goes to Sharia. And I don't know what the relationship between the two is. If there is Christian genocide, is it then being meted out by the Sharia courts or by the Sharia court officials? Now, let's understand this. It is unarguable that the English legal system implemented in Nigeria today had its roots from Christianity. It was originally a Christian legal system that developed into the common law in the United Kingdom, and the British colonialists who colonized Nigeria went and uprooted the Sharia system in northern Nigeria and replaced it with the English legal system, which is today implemented in the whole of Nigeria. Then the framers of the Nigerian constitution, in their own wisdom, thought Nigeria has three different legal systems. Number one, there is the English legal system. They call it the received English legal system or the received English law. There is the customary law, which is applicable in many parts of northern and southern Nigeria in matters of marriage, inheritance, and divorce and stuff like that. And then there is the Sharia legal system, which was in place before British colonialists removed it and replaced it with the English legal system. Now there is a clamor in northern Nigeria by a large section of the community that we want our relationships to be regulated by Sharia courts, by Sharia laws. And houses of assemblies in northern Nigeria use their constitutional powers to enact the laws that are only applicable on Muslims. And I don't know how that leads to genocide. And I don't know how those Sharia courts that do not have jurisdiction on non-Muslims affect non-Muslims in the way that is being described. It is very similar to the example of the Sharia or the interest-free banks like Jaiz Bank. There was a huge outcry in Nigeria when the license for Jaiz Bank was issued, because Muslims define interest as haram, not permissible in Islam, and they want a banking system which will not give them interest, but may share in their profit. And they clamored for one. And there is Jaiz Bank. I think Jaiz Bank, many of the shareholders are Igbos, but they know that it's a profitable business, and well done to them for subscribing. And it is a booming industry. Now you have Taj Bank, you have Halal Lotus Investment, Lotus Bank, and other banks coming up. But there was a huge outcry because they are interest-free. They are called Islamic banks, and I don't know who will force a Christian to put his money in Jaiz Bank. But is it not only fair for the Muslims who want to deposit their money in an interest-free bank to be given that opportunity? Isn't that what coexistence should be about? Why is it not fair for a Muslim who wants, when he has a problem with his wife or his children, or when the question of inheritance of his father arises, he wants to go to a Sharia court? What is our problem with that? How does that affect the unity of Nigeria or coexistence, and how does that lead to genocide? Sorry, Professor, I will just run through the two other questions.
No, you are educating the public.
Thank you. Now, someone said differentiate. Aminu Adamu asked me to differentiate between mob action and the kind of discussion around Sharia. And thank you very much, Auntie Funke, for the perspective you gave. And Brother Majid also mentioned this issue of the two mob actions, which at the time, for example, when Deborah was mob lynched, one of the first press statements that came from the Sultan of Sokoto, who is the leader and the representative of all Nigerian Muslims. He condemned it in unequivocal terms. But some people would say Muslims don't condemn it. And when your own leader, who represents all the Nigerian Muslims, officially the Sultan of Sokoto, and who is the president of the Supreme Court of Islamic Affairs, Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs, comes out unequivocally, Google, you will see his statement on condemning Deborah's death. When we talk about the woman that was mobbed, lynched in Kano, what I meant was it wasn't abolition that led to that incident. Of course, it was abolition in the beginning, and then the man now mentioned the Prophet of Islam, and the woman allegedly insulted the Prophet of Islam, and some people gathered and mob lynched her. I don't excuse that, I don't justify that, but we need to state the facts clearly. If we just said it was just because she denied someone performing ablution, then we are not telling the accurate facts. Remember that the woman's husband is a pastor who has a mega church in Kano and has been running the church for more than 30 years. So they are allowed to run a church for more than 30 years, but because of ablution, she was killed. That wasn't what happened. The governor of Kano, Ganduje, who was a Muslim, paid compensation for killing her and condemned killing her. No one condemned Harira Jibril's death as far as I know. No one condemned General Alkali's death or paid compensation. No one paid compensation for the 25 students of Sheikh Dahiru Bauchi that were killed in Jos. Now, what I am saying is that, yes, there are those incidences. No one can deny them. But then to brush it on the all of the Muslims when it is a small group of individuals, many of whom, if you stop them and said, recite the first verse of the first chapter of the Quran, may find it difficult to do correctly, to brush them with the whole of Muslims, when the Sultan condemned the incident, when the governor of Kano, representing the people of Kano, paid compensation for the killing, mob lynching of the woman, when her husband has been a pastor in Kano and has been running a church for over 30 years, and we are still saying every Friday Muslims just go out and start killing people all over the place. I think we can do much, much better as Nigerians. Now, the last issue I would address in the interest of time is the question of accepting that there is a genocide. And Chifunke made that case forcefully, and some other people made it. The issue, the problem with that is that if we say there is a specific genocide, let's say Christian genocide in Nigeria, and according to Trump, facilitated or enabled by the Nigerian government, the first thing that will do is that it will take our insecurity out of the hands of the Nigerian government. It will necessitate international intervention. Because you cannot have a genocide defined under the Genocide Convention, the Geneva Convention, or the Genocide Convention, and say it is a domestic matter, especially if the government of the country is not responding correctly. I don't know any country in the world where the Western army intervened and that made things better. And so we should be careful what we ask for. But let's assume there is no military intervention. The next thing that might happen is for the US government to put an economic sanction, economic embargo on Nigeria. If that happened, it will not discriminate between Muslims and Christians. We will all be poorer. We will all die of economic malfunction, and all of us will pay the price. If the US withdraws assistance from Nigeria because of these calls, it will not discriminate Muslim HIV carriers from Christian HIV carriers and kill only Muslims. It will affect both Muslims and Christians. It will affect Muslim IDPs and Christian IDPs. If the US decides with this that the Nigerian government is not doing well, so we will stop selling them arms, it is the terrorists and the criminal gangs that will have a field day, because our government even today complains of lack of weapons. And if Western governments stop selling them because of this advocacy, then we'll be even in a deeper trouble. And Boko Haram will kill all of us. Bandits will attack all of us. And so we should be careful what we wish for or what we ask for. Number two, even when we look at the numbers, and I know this may sound callous, but please understand the point I am making. Every single life is important, and one death is too many. But even according to the inter-society data, they are talking about 160,000 Muslims and Christians killed in Nigeria over the 5 years or so. The data that has been disproven. Let's concede for the sake of argument that it is correct that 160,000 Nigerians have been killed over the past 5 years by violent and extremist groups. They say 60,000 were Muslims, 100,000 were Christians. Does that make it a genocide in Nigeria or an existential threat to Nigeria? My answer is no. The number is very big, but exaggeration doesn't help us. In the United States, over the past 4 years, from 2021, 22, 23, and 24, 188,000 people died as a result of gun death, gun violence. Are guns existential threats now to America, or gun owners have become existential threat? Or should we say there is a genocide of non-gun owners or of Americans by gun owners because 188 have been killed as against Nigeria's 160? There is a problem. But exaggerating it will not help us. Oversimplifying it to say genocide will take away all the factors Antifunke talked about. Because if it is genocide, then you will not address economic factors. You will not address the question of insurgent groups wreaking havoc in places in Nigeria. You will not address the communal clashes happening. You will not address the farmer herder crisis happening in some parts. And because you have lumped everything together and it has become a genocide. And if people are committing a genocide, you have no business other than fighting them tooth and nail until all of them are gone, because there is no way you can say genocide, people who are committing genocide should be left. Finally, this conversation is letting the Nigerian government off the hook, because the Nigerian government has been criminally negligent. I don't say they are complicit. No president will come to power and say, my legacy will be how many Nigerians have been killed under me. I believe from President Jonathan to Buhari to President Tinubu, each of them want to solve the security problem in Nigeria. But many of there is incompetence, there is mega corruption, there is criminal negligence in some part. And these are issues we have to address. We have to address the question of our porous borders. You can walk into Nigeria from anywhere you like from our neighbors. And that's from where arms and ammunition are flooding in. Our soldiers lack basic weapons. They have been complaining. We haven't addressed that well. Some of them say they don't have enough manpower. We have not addressed that well. We are putting too much burden on the soldiers. When we say counter-extremism or counter-violence, if you are able to secure Nigeria's borders, 70% of our problem is gone, because the arms and ammunition and the weapons and the drugs that are being used will not flood into Nigeria. Our immigration system is one of the most corrupt in Nigeria. If you carry 10 human heads from Benin, you can walk into Nigeria up to Lagos with them if you have 50,000 naira in your pocket. You just need to give 1,000, 2,000 bribe throughout the checkpoints that are there. How do we secure our borders? What are we doing with the immigration system? What is NDLEA doing to control drugs? Because some of these terrorists, the gangs, especially in the Northwest, if you took away drugs from them for 7 days, some of them cannot even move their legs, not to talk of pulling the trigger, because they are addicted to drugs. How are drugs getting into our country? What is their logistics and supply routes? How do we take that down? How is it that they are still collecting billions of naira? How is it that kidnapping has become the most lucrative industry? These are issues we have to tackle. Someone mentioned the question of displacement, and Antifunke, I think. I have a list right now with a spreadsheet list showing about 600 Nigerian villages that have been displaced, that have been displaced. We talk about displacement in Plateau, we talk about displacement in Benue, all of which are true, are correct. There are 416 villages that have been displaced completely in Zamfara state. It is, the criminals happen to be Muslims. The victims happen to be Muslims. So there is no way to put it in a in a sensational narrative, and therefore we have accepted that to either continue or with little attention because it doesn't fit into a specific narrative. The villages that are displaced in Benue State are 43 according to the spreadsheet I have. There are 416 in Zamfara State. In Katsina, there are hundreds of villages that no one occupies today because of bandits. And the federal government, what is it doing? Today it is fighting them, tomorrow it is negotiating with them, next tomorrow it is the villages that are left to negotiate. And I can tell you, what is called negotiation today in northwestern Nigeria is not negotiation, it's surrender. It's surrender by northern Nigerian villages and communities to the bandits because they know the government has failed woefully in protecting them. They have been attacked time and again, and now they go to the bandits begging, cap in hand, kneeling down, asking them for peace, asking them to let them leave, and they agree to pay them taxes. And sometimes there are federal government representatives seated there saying there is a negotiation. How can there be a negotiation between farming and villages, farming communities and villages who do not have weapons and criminal gangs who have some of the highest grade military weapons, and they go back to the jungles with their weapons intact after the negotiation? I mean, people have just submitted, they have surrendered, and the federal government is overseeing that. But the victims are Muslims, the perpetrators are Muslims, and therefore it doesn't fit into any specific narrative, and we pretend as if that is not happening, and therefore rather addressing issues that are real elsewhere. But even those, we don't look at them in the nuance we should be looking at them. Someone mentioned Benue State here.
Thank you.
I mean, here, Professor. Yeah, thank you.
Well, those who want to ask questions, I apologize. You can ask your questions on December 7. I have worn out all the panelists. We have been here for 4 hours. So what comes next? 3 minutes after this conversation is over, the entire transcript will be released. I will also give you copies of the transcript. More people actually watch it on YouTube subsequently. Second, we'll cut some segments of this and use those segments. And some people feed this conversation into the classroom. I don't know what journalists would do with this. They usually will begin to release by Tuesday. I usually do not know the angle they will take. And finally, I do my own analysis for newspapers, Tribune, Punch, all of them, in which I reflect upon what you have said. I want to thank all of you. You've been, and your passion for the country is very visible. The defense of your position has clarity. We cannot resolve all issues, and the tensions are there. Who is to blame? Who is not to blame? In the final analysis, following up on Asu's suggestion, we have to live together. And in the final analysis, we have to respect religious boundaries. And also in the final analysis, all human beings, as all of you have said, their lives matter. Thank you very much. If you love music, stay behind and enjoy the music. And on December 7th, please come. Some issues have not been resolved. If you want us to convene another panel, just let me know and we will move this forward. Maybe we can convene a panel on Islam and Northern Nigeria. That has come out very clearly in terms of the questions people are asking. Thank you very much. Ms. Baruwa, I'm meeting you for the first time. I'm grateful. I know Dr. Dahiru a long time ago. Dr. Bukarti, I'm glad you are here. His colleague Shetima, when he saw the members of the panel, who sent a note to me that please add Dr. Bukarti, and you have been a very, very great addition in spite of the disagreement. And let me apologize to Ms. Baruwa.
No,
please,
Prof,
I will give your children that you have ignored some gifts when I see them for taking your time away from your kids. Please, all of you go and enjoy your dinner. And until we meet again, thank you very much.
Prof, if you permit me 30 seconds, please, Prof. I just wanted to clarify, Dr. Dahiru Majid, my brother, nothing I said was intended as a personal attack to you. I might have spoken passionately, and when I use the word nonsense, I mean, interpretation, it just means something meaningless or absurd, and that was what I saw your claim as. It appears that hurt you. I am so sorry for that. I didn't intend to personally attack you. I noticed when out of provocation or anger, you called me an extremist sympathizer. I am not one, and I have forgiven you for that. But I thank everyone for a robust conversation.
Well, thank you for being a statesman and offering the apology on behalf of Dr. Dahiru. I accept your apology. Thank you. Thank you.